Welcome to Raging Bullets, a DC Comics fan podcast, episode 274. Welcome to Raging Bullets. My name is Sean Whalen. I'm Dr. Norge on the comic forums, and I'm joined as always by my co-host Jim, the sensei of the whatnot Segulin, and the Duke of you know. On this episode, we've had a very special opportunity. I want to thank friend of the show, Art Lyon, and colorist extraordinaire for putting this together. We are joined by his friends, Ha and Lowell Francis, as we discuss the three of them and their work on Flashpoint Project Superman, issues 1 through 3. So, very special episode this time, and we're going to jump right into it. We are proud members of the Comics Podcast Network and the League of Comic Book Podcasts. Sponsoring us this episode is DCBService.com and InStockTrades.com. Over at DCBService.com, they are once again offering 50% of all of the issues of the New 52 for issue number 3. So this is great for people that have been doing the pre-ordering, because as you know, these books are just being released now. And as a fan, if you were saying, hey, I'm going to order all of the 52 books for the first 3 issues just to kind of see how I feel, and you're just starting to receive those books, you haven't yet decided, if am I going to keep all of them, or going to keep some of them, what titles are the ones that are really grabbing me. DCB Service is offering the opportunity to keep that 50% off discount one more month, so you're able to make that decision for next month. And I want to thank DCBService.com for offering that amazing bundle offer. So that's if you bundle all the 52 issues, you get 50% off on them. Very, very cool. Remember, they're also your source. If you're buying those comics digitally, they're supporting RagingBullets.com. Go to their website and click on that handy link up there. They have one not only for the direct DC store from Comixology, but they have one for Comixology in general. So when you're buying your digital books from Comixology, please consider supporting our show sponsor by clicking on the links right from their site. It doesn't cost you anything more, but it does give them a kickback then for being that portal to buy those books. And you can read those books on your computer and any of the wonderful app devices out there. So it's great. Whether you're buying paper or digital, DCBService.com is your source. Over at InStockTrades.com. I mentioned the Top 10 series at the start of this program, and Top 10 the 49ers softcover is available there. It's regularly $17.99, 38% off, only $11.15. This is written by Alan Moore, art by Gene Ha, colors by friend of the show, Art Lyon. If you haven't had a chance to read this, I'm a huge fan of Top 10. They have the whole series there, collected in trade paperback form. So please go to InStockTrades.com, pick this up. Remember, orders of $50 or more give you free shipping, so if there's been those books that you've been looking for, picking up the ones you've been missing, great opportunity to not only save on their amazing discounts, but you can also save on the shipping. So I'm a big fan of saving up and getting, more books that way. I look at that shipping cost as another title I could have picked up. So if you're like me and you think that way, make sure to shop at InStockTrades.com and bundle those books together. James, what kind of a podcast are we?
The Raging Bullets is a spoiler podcast. We go in-depth into plotline, story twists, and whatnot, the comics we're discussing on the show. So, if you haven't read the books, you may want to come back later so you can better enjoy the show.
Hawkman!
Joining us for this very special segment, co-writer, co-plotter of Flashpoint Project Superman, Lowell Francis, colorist and longtime friend of the show, Art Lyon, and artist extraordinaire, Gene Ha. And guys, I want to welcome you to Raging Bullets.
Wow, great to be here.
Good to be on the show.
It's always great to be back.
Kind of the first question I have as a fan who really enjoyed Project Superman, how did this all come about? This whole genesis, the first time I really heard a lot about it, I was at C2E2, and Gene, you were on a panel there talking about it. And as a fan going in, I didn't know what to expect from Project Superman. So can you guys maybe talk a little bit about the genesis of this project? Like, how did you get involved in it? That type of thing.
I'll just listen because I don't know this story either. So.
Well, and I have to pitch the ball over to Gene because Gene has a whole set of history from before I came on board that he has to narrate.
Yeah, Lowell doesn't know anything about my torrid three-way affair with Dan DiDio and Karen Berger, so it's kind of complex.
Gasp!
Can you believe that?
If you really want us to.
Well, Dan DiDio isn't willing to really talk about his relationship with Karen Berger yet, though he is willing to talk about his relationship with me, which is torrid.
Well, then I'll bleep the Karen part.
Okay, that'd be good. She has a reputation to protect. Me and Dan don't. Obviously, we know now, and this is stuff you and I didn't know back then, is that this is essentially the most ambitious year in the history of DC Comics that we know of, right? And that we've lived through. Huge stuff going on. And when I was jumping on board, I had no idea about the New 52 stuff. I didn't find out about it until everyone else found out about it. So I knew that they'd organized a conference for the summer event. They had the brilliant idea that would be an alternate reality. And I was asked if I wanted to jump on board with who was supposed to be the writer first, but turned out to be the co-plotter, Scott Snyder. And we traded ideas back and forth, and we were having this great time inside the framework created by Jeff Johns. But then Scott Snyder had to be pulled back because he had so many Batman responsibilities. So they then offered the writing responsibilities to me. But if you know anything about what it's like writing inside of a modern, even one of the big two comic book universes, man, it's rough. I mean, there's so many things you have to coordinate with. I realized there's no way I'm going to be able to get more than 3 hours of sleep at night and still be able to get any pages drawn. So that's when I said, I'd like to bring along my friend Lowell Francis, who I've worked with before on some small projects, to be the writer on this, because I just can't handle it. And that's where Lowell can jump in.
Right. Gene called me up and said, there's a project. I've been talking with Eddie Berganza about this. I've been bouncing some ideas back and forth. I have a set of things. And he very basically described the general outline that we had a Superman. He's in a facility. There's experiments going on, and that's part of a tie-in to something. And threw a whole bunch of ideas. If you've talked to Gene for any length of time, you'll realize that when I say he throws a bunch of ideas at you, you are inundated with just a whole series of creative thoughts and plans and details and spinning off onto how we can bring Darkseid in and the Third World and Jack Kirby references and on. I'm going, okay, maybe we want to scale that back a bit.
Yeah, you'll be convinced to talk to schizophrenic when you talk to me about plot ideas. It's like people, like multiple personality disorder.
I'd like to joke that Gene has an extra brain.
And I use half of each.
He is the most constantly, interestingly creative person I've ever talked to. Let me say that.
I cannot keep up with Alan Moore, but otherwise I can usually keep up with anybody else.
And by the way, we have to have a proposal in 24 hours.
Oh, my.
Oh, that's right. I forgot about that.
Yeah. So I wrote up something in about 5 or 6 hours, put something together, showed it to Gene, and Gene went, oh, there's this one thing I forgot to tell you. And so then I went back and rewrote it.
Gene!
I think I said, Gene, I'm going to call you back in half an hour, okay? And then we gave it to Eddie Berganza, and literally we had a couple of days, and then C2E2 happened, and they asked if I could come up to C2E2 because Gene was already going to be there. And it was at that point that Scott Snyder and I and Gene sat down with Eddie. And it was the first time I'd ever met Scott Snyder, who is one of the nicest people I've ever met in my life. Just super nice guy. Do you want to describe any of that lunch meeting, Gene?
We ate at a hotel lunch buffet. I was worn out from everything, and especially I was really tired of thinking of this stuff and then having ideas shot down and stuff by editorial or just, let me put it this way. Things are organized now at DC where you have the editors who are very powerful, and you have Jeff Johns, who's both writing the event, conceived the event, and also is above the editors, even though he's one of the writers. And we were coordinating very closely with Rex Ogle and Eddie Berganza. But we never along the way did get to talk to Jeff Johns, who was insanely busy because he was organizing the biggest event in DC history, which we didn't know about. So coordinating with him we'd get secondhand emails saying, no, that does not fit in with the larger plan. And we didn't know what this larger plan was, which was the Big 52 launch. So it was hard, and that's why I quit.
Good thinking.
I'll tell you that the sort of the big thing is Eddie said, we love what you've got. You've got some great ideas here. We're very interested in what you've got. And Scott Snyder had only had just a little bit of a chance to kind of go over what we gave them. And Eddie goes, it's great what we've got here, what you've got planned. Oh, by the way, Superman doesn't arrive until the end of issue 1.
Wow.
And I went, well, that would have been good to know.
Point of the lunch, I was thinking, I'll let Lowell sort this out.
And Scott and I riffed out and figured out kind of, okay, given that we can't have Superman appear until the end, we've got to make that the important plot point, and how do we turn things that we've already built around. And so we kind of built up the basic structure for 1 and talked a little bit about what 2 might look like. And keep in mind that we still had no idea. We were told that Flashpoint would have some impact on the DC universe. But our impression was that characters would carry over, that villains would carry over, or that certain details would carry over, or they might take the opportunity to maybe change around someone's origin or something. We had no sense of the New 52. We weren't told any of that at that point. And I think that that's probably the case for a number of the writers, or maybe just us, which would be terrifying.
We were singled out.
Yes. So we're trying to kind of they want us to get a villain that's significant that could be brought over, and pretty much the only reference material we had is we were given, of course, the timeline for the Flashpoint universe, but not kind of given a solid explanation of how this had come about, and given a lot of room because we were saying, well, how does it work that Doomsday's there? How does it work that the shuttle lands in Metropolis? These things, and we were told, given what was actually behind Flashpoint, that this would all work out. So we were able to kind of hand wave around some of those things.
So did you guys know then what was behind Flashpoint when you were creating this? Or was it just that you were, kind of told that, because from the way you were explaining it, was it just kind of like you knew that it was just going to kind of work out? Is that how you had to approach it story-wise?
We understood the Flashpoint event. It's not the larger context or how it was going to affect the DC universe. That was still a mystery.
Okay.
So, I think we knew pretty early on that Reverse Flash was actually, spoiler if you actually haven't read the thing, but that the real guy who altered time was not the Reverse Flash, it was actually the Flash. So, we knew that type of stuff.
But I think the real key thing is that we didn't know how that had come about. And what's interesting is the Flashpoint timeline that we were given starts out with the first date that's on there is that Jay Garrick doesn't become the Flash. And the timeline suggests that because of that, the Justice Society falls apart. There's no Justice Society. Very few heroes survive the war, and that sort of sets up the domino effect that falls out from there. But that's really the clearest key that we were given beyond the whole Reverse Flash stuff.
Question for you guys. Now, with Subject Zero, Lieutenant Sinclair, when you guys were first creating the concept, was he from the beginning, or was it one of those kind of modified, when you found out like Superman wasn't appearing until the end of issue 1, was that like, okay, what are we going to do in the front, or was there always that plan to lay out that guy, throughout the first issue?
Gene, do you want me to do this one?
I should probably start off with this because I played around with ideas with Scott Snyder. But, our basic charter on this was Superman lands in Metropolis, causes some damage when he lands, and is immediately picked up by the Army as a baby and raised by the Army. That was very vague. Subject Zero, the character who eventually became Subject Zero, went through a lot of evolution where we played with a lot of different variations on it and playing with various types of technologies where his powers could come from. My original conception of him was, if you ever see my original sketch for him, it's of a teenage character. The timeline got modified so that, no, it wasn't possible to have him show up as a teenager or younger. And I was going to have him as this kind of, it's going to look like a manga variant of Superman in a lot of ways, but bits of that state, he still kind of looks like a character from Dragon Ball Z or something like that. So, anyway, I'll hand it off to Lowell now.
Well, and our first conception was that you would go into that first issue, and this is a couple of drafts because we did a lot of significant changes, but you would see a character who, because the title is Project Superman, you assume it's Superman. And as it goes on, we see him getting subject to all the various tests and treatments and things. And then, parallel to what we ended up doing with Sinclair, he loses it in the field. And it isn't until that we kind of realize that, in fact, the character we've been seeing isn't Superman, but is kind of a Bizarro clone. And one of these Bizarros that we've seen in the background is, in fact, Superman. But we got notes that said that we couldn't have any ambiguity on who was Superman or who was not Superman, which changed a couple of different drafts along, even at a fairly late point, because that actually, the version that we have of issue 1, the previous draft to that, we didn't kind of identify Sinclair. You thought it was Superman for a long time, but we were given notes to change that.
Yeah, that was, as a fan reading it, one of the things I really enjoyed about issue 1 was it led me to believe that the whole miniseries was going to be about Sinclair, like we were going to follow him as the hero. And, kind of seeing that in this world, because there was no Superman, this is the guy who becomes this world's Superman. That was kind of my original thought on it. until you see that last page, where or the last couple pages, where all of a sudden, Superman's craft crash lands into there, and I'm like, wait a minute, what? You mean he's not here yet? It was great to go back and reread issue 1, knowing the ending of issue 1. Looking at Sinclair from a different perspective, because I saw him very differently on my first read-through than I did the second time through. Was that something that was intentional that you guys did along the way? Or is that was it kind of a happy, fun accident for me as a reader?
I hope that his character becomes deeper on a second read-through. And, I mean, that there is a theme there about parents and father figures and so on that carries through, and that when you get to that end of issue 1, you go, oh boy, this is not going to go well. When you finally see that there is going to be a kind of a rival, a brother character that that this cannot be a good thing.
One of the things that I thought was kind of it was, when I was reading through it the first time, I was kind of thinking that maybe the DNA, the alien DNA that they had used to craft onto Sinclair was Clark's DNA. I was thinking that they were, kind of like making Sinclair in a way sort of a Superboy kind of clone and/or grafting of Kryptonian DNA into the human. And I thought that's where I was my head was kind of at as this was going on, and that's how he got his powers. I didn't really, and it wasn't until that final panel, that final page where you see Clark crash, I'm like, oh, that's kind of cool. But was that one of the ideas you guys were playing with, or was that never even on the table?
I think we played up early on, and in fact, that was sort of the plan. We had seen the script for Flashpoint 3, I think it is, where Cyborg and Batman and so on go into Project Superman, and we knew that there was a corpse of Superdog there, of Crypto. So we knew that there was a second subject, but we didn't have any other sense of things. And it was at C2E2 that Eddie Berganza told us that the character would be using Doomsday's DNA to do that. And at that point, we're like, okay, well, we can certainly work with that. But yeah, originally, because of the timeline, we were trying to figure out how do we get these characters parallel, how do we get that worked around?
It's a really interesting story structure because the way that the story ends completely changes your reading of that first issue because of the confusion that you guys were talking about, Jim, Sean.
One of the things I've really liked about this series, I liked this series so much, I rebought it on the digital app. It's all 3 issues aren't out yet. Issue 1 and 2 are on it. But I have the single paper issues, but it really struck me that after getting all 3 issues and knowing where Flashpoint goes and what Superman's full story is throughout the whole thing, when you go back and see Sinclair in the present right from issue 1, right into there, knowing what I know now, the story has a very fresh read-through for me because I know who he is, I know how he got where he is. We've seen the evolution of the character, and that was something that really struck me in this series, was we got to see Sinclair gradually evolve into this. And it was so great because you saw it in his dialogue, you saw it in the coloring of the lettering, you saw it in his word balloons, you saw it, there was so much to his visual and dialogue evolution in his behaviors as he was going along, how much this was affecting him, and also his social interactions were affecting him. The story really captivated me on that level because you could follow his complete journey, but then when Cal was introduced, you followed his journey and how they paralleled each other, and it was something that, to me, I think you really have, and I encourage anybody listening to this, if you haven't reread this, do yourself a favor and do it, because it really is a completely different experience with all the reveals in place to follow that journey. It's like a whole new book for me.
Let me say this. Gene's facial expressions, that just every time I look at that, blow me away. He manages to handle the subtlety of that in a lot of those pages that every time I look at it, it looks fresh to me when I reread it.
Something I've learned from watching good actors, which is that usually inside of social situations, there's what we want, and then what we're trying to make it look like we want. The obvious example is you're looking at a pretty girl and you're trying to not look down too far down. You're trying to look at her face. In everything we do, there's this kind of balance of what we're supposed to want and what we actually want. And if you can draw that at the same time of just what are people looking at and what are they really thinking about, that's what I try to do every time in my drawing. A lot of people just try to accentuate one thing, like I am really angry, or I am really happy, or It's very, very rare in life. You got to have a pure emotion.
You know, guys, one thing I before we continue on, because I've got tons of questions about and comments about this, but I think what was really interesting through a conversation I had with Art, I don't remember if we did this on the show last time you were on, Art, or if it was just a conversation you and I were having on Facebook leading up to this, but you guys, the three of you together, have a rich history. You've known each other for a long time. Can you just share a little bit how long you've known each other and how that affected the way you worked on this project? Because I think there's something to creators knowing each other for a certain amount of time in that how that would affect maybe your work style on a particular project, knowing how each other thinks and things like that.
The sands of time.
Lowell is the middle link of all this. He's the guy who knew everybody and brought us together.
25 years, I think that Art and Gene and I have known each other, and I knew of Art before I met Art because he was actually away in the Army at that point when I started hanging out with some people that he knew, and essentially through role-playing games. When he came back, then he started playing with our group pretty regularly, and I think Gene played on and off with us. Gene and I used to sit in the back of classrooms in high school and get our work done and play villains and vigilantes in the back row.
Yeah, I met Gene through Lowell, so it's all because of role-playing games, really.
Yeah, and I should also say that Lowell and his circle of gaming friends read the most amazing comics I've never heard of before. I mean, two of the big events in my life are that Lowell in middle school came back from England, and he brought back a big pile of 2000 ADs and lent them to me as like a library. And I just read through them, and I'd never seen anything like a Judge Dredd comic before. And then after that, hanging around his house during some downtime, he threw a pile of Alan Moore comic books at me. And again, it was just like, what the hell is this? I've never read a story like this before. It just blew my mind.
Yeah, our group bought, and we're very much DC people for the longest time through those number of years leading up to Crisis, and I read Swamp Thing in the new series from the first issue it came out, and then it was probably the first comic I really followed religiously when Alan Moore started to write it.
Oh yeah, I remember him handing me that first anatomy lesson issue of Alan Moore's Swamp Thing, and me trying to say, I don't like horror comics. I mean, they're okay, but I'm just not into them. Like, seriously, read this.
Well, and Gene came back the next day in biology class with this whole thing about, planarian worms. Oh, my God, that's great. And had this whole science read that he had done on it. I was like, what about his humanity? Oh, no, but the planarian worms. And
I get a little technical.
Yeah. We've gamed on and off with each other over the years because I'm up here in South Bend, and Gene's, of course, in Chicago, and Art's in Bloomington, and Gene's come down here to play, and Art's visited through. And
most of the time that I gamed with Lowell sort of in the late 80s and very early 90s a whole bunch, like as much as I possibly could, basically.
A lot of DC heroes.
Yes, a lot of DC heroes, role-playing game.
And Champions.
And Champions and everything else. And then I moved to Bloomington in the summer of 91, and I've lived here since then. But yeah, I go up there for family stuff, and sometimes I see Lowell. I saw Lowell at Gene's birthday party in Chicago last year. So yeah, we're always sort of moving around.
Has your love of role-playing games affected how you design comics?
Interesting question.
I tell stories every week. I mean, and I think about story structure and how stories play out all the time. And one of the things is, of course, when I'm doing that is I can't map out a straight 3-arc, can't get all the beats set. I can kind of put them out there, but then people interact with those, and I have to change up on that. And that's a little bit like working with Gene on some things. I have to get in that mindset is Gene will come back to me on points in the script, and I when I do my script, I don't send it to the editors first. I send it to Gene, and then Gene tears me a new one and points out things to me that I didn't see, and we have arguments, and I have to kind of look at it in that kind of, okay, how do I now reshape this in the way I do at the table, sort of with improvisation? How do I get this to the place it needs to be?
The GM-player relationship is one very much of trust, where you have to trust the guy running the game, the dungeon master. And I may have critiques on things that Lowell does, but in the end, I set the ground rule that, Lowell, you have absolute veto power over everything in the script. I may object to something in the end, but you've got to use your own judgment and say, you know what, Gene? this is what I believe, and this is how the table's going to run at this point.
There's this old joke in role-playing games, if you're the GM, that the plot that you have in mind never survives its first encounter with the players.
Yes. Yeah, you're constantly adjusting.
Which is also good practice for dealing with editors.
Well, and I'll say the other thing that it is because I'm always doing these kinds of things and thinking about stories and stuff, I don't worry if we do get something shot down, because I know we'll have another idea.
Right.
I have that confidence to go, okay, well, let's do something else then.
And that's really important in my experience. I was talking to a friend of mine who's trying to get some writing done and submitting things, and they were really frustrated, and it turned out that they had only sort of written like one thing and submitted it and gotten rejected. And, just based on my experience as a colorist and also years back trying to break into the industry as a penciler, you have to give that up. You have to just keep producing material and learning, and don't worry about rejections.
Right. Well, and we did, I should tell you that when we had a friend of ours, the reason they're actually kind of working together comic-wise now is we had a friend of ours who was a really good artist who died about 5-6 years ago, sort of freakishly.
Barry was an artist.
Yeah, Barry was an artist, and his death kind of polarized us into talking to one another more, and about wanting to do something together. And we ended up doing a couple of proposal pitches for DC at that point. We did an Elseworlds that we worked really hard on that we turned in, and then they said, yeah, we're not doing any more Elseworlds. And yeah, and then my other favorite pitch, which I loved, which I'm sure other people have pitched, but I thought we had a great take on it, which was essentially Edward Nygma, consulting detective, doing the Riddler as a mystery series.
I was really excited about that one. I made a logo and a little kind of brochure that looked like a mini comic book kind of introductory pamphlet and stuff like that. And yeah, it turned out that other people had dibs on the Riddler, so that one just died on contact.
It's too bad. I really like that because I love that character.
Yeah, we worked pretty hard on that, but you have to... It's so weird. You have to like make things and then just not worry about them. It's kind of, it's like having kids and then throwing them out into the world at 18 or before 18 and they're out of your hands and you just have to move on.
Oh, I should mention something about Barry Winston, the artist. He published some stuff inside of, say, like the Champions Rule Book and stuff like that, but I don't think he'd ever done an actual comic book yet, had he?
No, he had done some inkings for one of the, like playing with one of the old Manhunter comic books. One of the artists there, a woman, I think, years ago, but I don't know the details on that.
Yeah, but at the time of his death, he and Lowell were working on comic books, with Lowell writing and Barry doing the artwork. And I was curious about this a few months before Barry suddenly passed away from a heart attack or something.
Yeah.
And I was looking at Lowell's scripts and I said, these scripts are really good. You should actually be doing something with this. And, I hope you guys do really well with it. And then Barry died, and then that's how the whole discussion of me and Lowell working together started, because suddenly Barry had disappeared.
Gene has been, as I think anyone who's ever worked with Gene will tell you, Gene has been incredibly generous with his time, overly generous at times with his time and his energy.
Obsessively generous.
Yes.
Well, you guys worked together on the story Samson and the Hero Initiative benefit book, because I joined the Hero Initiative, so I got that, and I really enjoyed that. And then I haven't had a chance to read it yet, the Mouse Guard, Legends of the Guard.
Yes, part of the Eisner Award-winning anthology. I'm just going to get that in there.
And it's recently, big fan of the Rocketeer, and I honestly just discovered this because I was looking you guys up in preparation for this. Rocketeer Adventures with IDW, a story called TKO.
Yeah, I had the pleasure to work with Scott Dumbier, who I'd never really worked hands-on with an editor before, and he's amazing, just absolutely amazing. He took what I'd done and he gave a few suggestions and he tweaked it, and just with some little things made it 10 times better than it was to start.
He is a smart man, and he's also, when he gets passionate about a project, he is amazingly passionate about it. Scott Dunbar was working at DC. He was not given, he'd suggest all these things like, I've got a plan for how we can do digital comics, and certain ideas would get shot down, and then someone else would take it up. But he has a lot more freedom to actually get these things going at IDW because it's a much smaller organization. So
yeah, I got to work with Scott actually on some of my first work as a colorist with Gene. On he was the editor on the 49ers, right? And also on the World Storm relaunch of the Authority.
Guys, I have a question for all of you. One of the things that really struck me when I was reading through this to prep for this discussion tonight was just the sheer amount of detail and content in this story. But knowing that you guys were on such a tight timeline, because, I mean, this project especially with all the changes you're talking about you guys went through, turning this into actual production and then actually getting the book put together and put out, you guys had to have been like just really on a tight schedule to put this together. Am I right in assuming that?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah. And I had hand surgery in the middle of it.
Oh, no.
Oh, yeah, you couldn't type.
I had to write out the script for issue 1 longhand and have my wife type it up.
Oh,
Really?
Yeah. And the day I went into surgery, they were like, in the morning, they were like, oh, we're going to have a big group meeting in the afternoon. But I was already at the hospital.
Timing.
Oof.
Yeah, I'll mention I originally signed on board saying, I'm going to do some amazing stuff, but I'll need 2 months per issue to get it done. And they said yes. And then they sent me the final. Then they announced I was in the book. Then they gave me the revised deadlines of a month per book, and it's kind of like, well, there we go.
and Gene and I had worked on a style. We did a couple test pieces.
Oh, yeah.
That was in a completely different style. It was a much more involved, more laborious style, and we had to abandon that, of course, in the interest of meeting a monthly schedule.
I should mention on the last issue, we were told that, well, I mean, as we all know now, the last issue of Flashpoint was coming out in 1 week, and in the same week, the first of the new 52 number 1s was coming out. And no other DC books were allowed to come out that week. So we were told, if Flashpoint number 3 does not meet its deadline to be published the week before then, it's never coming out in floppy form at all.
Wow.
Yeah, so it's like you can't be late. You just can't.
So no pressure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
A lot of sleepless nights.
It was moral pressure, but we were still going to get our page rate. If we didn't get it done, we would feel really, really bad for the readers and all the other folks like that.
Right.
If they never got to see it.
One of the things that constantly impresses me about the comics industry and the work that all of you do, especially, as I've gotten older and really been able to read more interviews with creators and understand deadlines that you guys are under, has been that you've got to make decisions as far as sacrifices. Like, Gene, you talked about, like, you wanted, like, a 2-month plan to really do this a certain way. With it being shifted to a 1 month, that means that you as a creator, and I'm sure, and this really is a question for all of you because you all run into this position, you have to start making sacrifices as far as, I want to make sure that this is good. I want to make sure this is something satisfying for the fans. One of the things that always has amazed me about the artwork that you and Art have done together, and then, Gene, obviously any artwork that I've ever seen from you, and Art, actually, we've talked about other work that you've done, like Brave and the Bold and stuff like that, where you're really working on this amazing style of color work. But you guys have to make sacrifices in order to get those deadlines in. How do you deal with those sacrifices? How do you approach that? And this obviously goes with the writing as well. How do you approach those sacrifices to get the book done on time and yet feel satisfied with the product that you're putting out there?
Don't sleep.
I pretty much lost all social contact with friends and family, except for, like, the most important events and, birthdays and stuff like that. And I got really, really good at learning to administer caffeine to myself in small doses so I wouldn't crash too badly.
Yeah, I started drinking coffee working on this project, but luckily not enough that I'm not addicted. I've always avoided coffee because I was always under the impression that it didn't help me, but somehow it helped on this. But at least now I know I can turn to it if I need it, I guess.
For me, it's that I go 20 pages. Holy crap. How do I tell a satisfying arc in 20 pages? And I will admit that one of my things is on that sort of first pass through where I kind of rough out the beats is I'm trying to cut stuff down so that I can give Gene a little more room to do some stuff. But Gene did tell me when I did my first script, he said, artists want to be challenged. You want to present us with the challenge and we'll figure out how to work around that. And so I did try to do that. And
Don't give the specifics of what everything is. Just describe why the scene is cool. Give them a challenge of, let everyone know that this is the Clint Eastwood moment. Let everyone know that this is the destruction of the Death Star moment. Just let the artist know. Make it cool in such and such way. Make this room have to look cool. Don't describe what the room looks like. Describe what the emotional impact of the room is.
That's interesting because I noticed that in the script that there's a lot of descriptions of why something's important or why it's happening or what it references, which compared to trying to think of something that's really spare, like a Grant Morrison script. Like we did that one issue of Global Frequency, Gene. His
Warren Ellis.
Scripts, Warren Ellis. Wait, I'm sorry. Yes, Warren Ellis. His script was really sparse, as I recall. Not much description, just enough there to let an artist like Gene be able to go to town, basically.
One of the things I saw throughout this, which I thought was a really just cool usage of the color blue. Because normally when I look at blue, I'm thinking kind of calming, everything's surreal, and just that kind of style. And like in issue 1, it kind of has that feel. But by the end of issue 3, the blue is really just kind of a very statement of Subject Zero, and it's got this intensity to it. There's just like this energy, and just it's kind of the dun 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 moments that when I'm seeing all these blue, the heavy hard blues, I was like, and that was something that really caught me, and I was like, wow, that's kind of cool, because usually I think of reds in that kind of term where it's that energy towards it, and that was something I really enjoyed out of this.
It's interesting, I've been talking with Gene a lot recently about color theory, but usually you would use red to make things sort of intense, I guess, but one of the things I wanted to do, and this is actually a trick I've used for years, is if I want to create an environment that is cold and sort of antiseptic, which we have here with the Project Superman lab, I use a blue that's really, really cold. There's not much warmth in it. In terms of printing, it's got a lot of cyan. It's kind of a cold electric blue, sort of. And I use it increasingly as the story goes on in issues 2 and 3. I use it in the panel borders and Subject Zero's special effects, his energy effects.
Another thing we should note is that there were limited options for what we could do with Subject Zero's color range and his color symbolism, because Superman, in any Superman story, Superman is always a sun god. So therefore, there are certain colors that are associated with them. And we had to give this impression that when Superman finally lets loose in the 3rd issue, it's the coming out of the sun. The sun is coming to warm the earth. Therefore, blue was one of the obvious choices for having Subject Zero as the coldness and the feeling of death that's pervaded the earth until Superman finally rises up.
I loved that I felt like Subject Zero. I felt a sympathy for him in many of the times that I read through this. And yet there was times where I totally felt like he was this villain as well, because you got to see he developed like this fanatical nature to him. But I love how I was watching his environment, and Sam Lane's mistake, Sam Lane felt a certain amount of responsibility for his mistakes in handling this character, kind of the abandonment issues that we got to see going on with Subject Zero. I think what this story really hit me from was it explored nature and nurture. Like, we got to see Superman's inherent nature. Like, there's certain qualities about Superman that you've taken away the Kents. You've taken away certain things that we're used to with Superman, working at the Daily Planet, seeing the world from certain perspectives. But yet, at his core, there is a nature aspect, which I think, it's why in a family, when you've got 2 brothers, for example, or a brother and a sister, whatever, they're coming from the same family, they come from the same genetic group, but yet there's certain differences about them that are in nature. That's part of their genetic makeup. No matter what the nurture part is like, you're going to get that. In this case, we really see 2 different characters going through this kind of, I hesitate to call it nurture, but they're going through this environment together. And granted, Sam Lane has changed things up a bit in how he handled Cal, but even those around Sam are still pushing that same agenda with Cal. And it was interesting just to see that kind of how Sinclair turned out one way, going down one path because of where he came from in this world and all that. And Cal, in his own way, given the right stimulus, still wound up having some quality. Like, at the end, I still felt like, that's Superman. I still felt that aspect of him, even though you took away so many things that we know to be part of the Superman mythos, the things that have, generated who he was, just adding little tidbits of those in, like Lois, and then Sam Lane trying to instill some kind of moral values to him along the way. This kid turned out, in the end, to be somebody who I'm like, I can so see that is Superman, even though he's that scrawny little dude. And I saw in this whole thing, I saw that. And that was something that I really appreciated in your development of this series, was seeing just that different relationship between the 2 characters and their journeys being expressed that way, because it was something that I think you established the environment surrounding them so well with characters like Sam Lane. And then obviously the character who would have been Captain Atom in a different light. I really enjoyed that aspect of the whole thing. How much of that entered into your discussions when you guys were talking about this? Did you look at that duality of relationships?
I'm going to say yeah, because I can take credit for it then. But no, I think it's important, and I'm going to say something that's going to seem a little odd, is Art, this is Art, Gene, and I, but all have parents that are divorced of various levels and kinds. So there is a certain amount of thinking about those father issues there. But one of the things that Gene and I had talked about at the beginning that Gene brought to me was that there are some parallels between the sort of the general Tarzan story and what we're doing here in Project Superman. Now, we moved further away from those as the plot got sketched out and developed, but there is that question of nature versus nurture, and what makes a good person, how do they adapt to that, and it's why we have the Luthor scene to give another parallel parental relationship. It's why we have Dr. Ridge represents another kind of parental relationship there, with the Swamp Thing reference that actually comes out of that. And then, of course, Lois is sort of the third leg of the sort of children of Sam Lane in some ways.
Oh, I should mention that the Superman as Tarzan, who doesn't speak until he meets Lois Lane, is something that pretty much came from Eddie Berganza, and I'm pretty sure also Jeff Johns in their discussions. And Eddie Berganza brought that to me, and then I handed it off to Lowell.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting.
But yeah, we thought about that. And if you look at issue 1, you'll see there's a lot of Lone Wolf and Cub references there as well, which is another father-son relationship. And there's actually some pretty specific, and the titles of all the issues are taken from Lone Wolf and Cub, actually.
You could argue there's some interesting statements being made there about nature versus nurture. But the fact that Cal turns out as well as he does, despite the fact of being raised in a really screwed up environment, kind of reminds me of when I read the first Harry Potter book, and I was like, why is this kid so nice and so normal? Because he was raised horribly.
I'll say that I'm pretty sure I'm the one who injected the idea of putting Lone Wolf and Cub symbolism in it, but Lowell's the one who had to then run with that and actually make a story out of this one little idea I had. But yeah, there was a lot of visual symbolism there, where you'll see a lot of sword symbols contrasted with a sphere symbol. And essentially, Cal, at a certain point inside of, say, Sam Lane's office, has a sword hanging on the wall near him, and then a baseball on the other side of him, and he has to decide which way he's going to go, which, of course, the first story of Lone Wolf and Cub.
Oh, cool.
That was awesome.
I didn't even notice that until you're mentioning it now. That's outstanding.
I love that he took when he took that baseball, and then we saw it later as being something that he carried with him, because we actually saw it get dropped during a battle, and that was something that baseball, I ended up being something I was like following like Waldo on the story. Like, where's the baseball now? But it was cool to see him, like, when it got swiped. It was cool to see that empty at that moment. And I also took that as kind of, when he was looking at the picture, he got to see, like, a father-son relationship that was something that he was longing for with Sam Lane, which I thought was something that was, like, immediately connected to me, like, that grabbing that ball was in some way a symbolism of a father-son relationship that I think he kind of felt like he had with Sam Lane, because Sam was going for that as well. So I loved that was like a two-sided relationship there.
Yeah, I think that's really important, and I think it makes Sam Lane a much more palatable character in this book, and more interesting to me. Because, here's the thing is, I think that the alternate Sam Lane story that we see going on here is just as interesting as the alternate Superman story that we see. Because Sam Lane is so black and white and so awful in the DC Superman books over the last couple years. It's neat to see a different take on that.
Yeah, I really like this character. He seems like I would read a miniseries about him.
I think part of it also is that Sam Lane's always been a guy who's taken his job more seriously than his family. And in our book, we were able to put him in a situation where being a good father was his job. Mm-hmm. And that totally changed how he acted as a parent, at least to Kal-El.
Yeah, and it also felt, for me, very realistic in how, not only how everyone was treating Cal, but how Sam was dealing with Cal, and just how he had his first mistake, and then he's going to learn from the past going forward and do things differently, and right down to the people experimenting on this little kid with everything they did to him and everything they did to Lieutenant Sinclair. Just everything felt very realistic to me. If you can use the term realistically when you're applying, experiments on aliens and augmenting human DNA, it had that natural feel to it.
It's very rare in a story that I find myself rooting for Sam Lane, because usually I'm on Lois's side and I'm seeing what that relationship was like and how he did put the job first and never saw her as the job. And if he did, I think that was the funny thing about this story. I saw like this potential for like, wow, he could have really been a great dad, to his real kids if he had given them the same kind of, nurturing that he was trying to give Cal, because it worked. I mean, he really took this kid, and in in many ways, his direct influence there, he kind of served as a surrogate Pa Kent. It didn't, not to the same level that we're used to seeing, and Cal obviously wasn't ready to do the kind of things we saw him do as Superman traditionally, but it really was his influence towards the end that I thought was a foundation piece that people like Lois were able to tap into when the time came, and actually helped him overcome things with Sinclair. I found that to be fascinating through this, because I'm like, wait, this is Sam Lane, and I want to high-five him?
Well, and, there's reference in the script, I think, right, to other things that he's done with Cal. Like, I think there's reference to him playing catch, right, with the ball? Yeah.
Are there things you wanted to do in this that you couldn't do? Like time-wise, or was there something, like a direction you wanted to go with the character, or something you maybe wanted to expand upon?
I know that one of the criticisms that I've seen of issue 1 is that because we had to go through everything so fast, some people didn't feel a strong enough connection with Sinclair there. I wish we'd had a couple more pages each book. I wish we'd had another scene we could have put in, or something else to strengthen. But I think, as it stands, when we got to the arc of things, the books fell out as they did. I am going to make one exception. I'm going to hold off and let Art and Gene answer the question before I come back and say there is one thing I would have maybe done differently.
I wish I had spent less time on... It was weird. When I got this first issue of the artwork, I started working on the action scene at the near the end of number 1 first, like from pages 14 on or whatever, and I spent way too much time on the first few pages. I wish I had been able to plan things out a little better, and maybe we had talked early on about giving each time period a color scheme, and I was just in such a hurry that I kind of did that, but not as much as I wanted to.
My big regret is that I wish I had a better idea of who the characters would have ended up as when I first designed them, because, oh man, like Lieutenant Sinclair, I wish I'd known the whole thing about... I started off with a certain conception of him as this very kind of high-tech, perfect clone, and then he turned out to be a normal guy with the Doomsday genetics in him. And if I'd kind of had that conception originally, I would have gone in a slightly different direction, but I already had sketches approved and concepts approved, and I just kind of went on from there. Oh, yeah, that was a little complex. Well,
the other thing is, of course, as the books are rolling along, after issue 1 came out, I saw in various people's reviews all this speculation that Sinclair was going to be the new Apollo, that he would be, because at that point people knew about the new 52 and that they were doing this stuff, and I will admit, I went, oh, wow, that would have been awesome. if we had known, if we could have tied some things in and had some sense of that, it would have been really neat to have been able to pull those kinds of threads in. It would have been a very different book, but I would have liked that opportunity.
Oh, hey, let me throw in something else along that line. If I'd known about the redesigned Superman with his Kryptonian battle armor from the New Justice League and Superman books, the funny thing is that I'm going to be giving away something really big here. Of course, I said we had no idea about the 52 stuff before we finished up the stories and stuff, writing the stories. But then I designed an armor that looks a lot like that Superman costume. And I would have tied it together a lot more closely if I had a chance to hear about what the Kryptonian battle armor concept and seen that sketch. Because that would have been just a beautiful way to tie everything in for readers. It just happened to be kind of like a nice coincidence. They did look like each other, but there was no coordination.
One of the things I saw when you guys first introduced Sinclair before the experiments, they show him taking off his shirt, and he's got some Asian tattoos right along his back. Mm-hmm. Is there an actual translation for what those were the symbols of?
Those letters spell out the official job title of the Lone Wolf, which is like the Imperial Executioner or something like that.
Cool. How cool is that?
You can always count on Gene for that kind of stuff, man.
Yes.
Gene does not skimp.
Yeah, and I went to friends who taught English in Japan to get the translation, and they had to do a lot of research to figure out what exactly the characters were to spell that out.
Well, how awesome is that? Good
question. So, thank you, Kurt and Kenny.
Kurt, I was just going to ask if it was Kurt.
Art, you were talking about that one fight scene, and I'm assuming you're talking about when Sinclair really just unloads on the first time, and he actually kills his own men, and he goes and just destroys everybody. I got to tell you how much I loved just the way that whole thing played out. It was one, you're shifting from the heavy, intense reds then to the more of a standard colored theme. Then you had some X-ray bits, but the detail of the gore was absolutely wonderful with body parts, and then even little things like a bullet. You show the bullet deflecting off of somebody, off of his chest as it compresses and does nothing. There was just so much into that I actually sat down and just, after reading it, you sit back and just go through the panels and one at a time, take your time and actually savor it. So outstanding work on those things, man.
I'm so glad to hear that. That's why I worked on that sequence first, because I knew that my coloring on the other pages, the pages that are more sedate, my coloring on those was going to be relatively straightforward, fairly simple, and I wanted this action sequence to be jarring and have a lot of grit. And there's lots of special effects and explosions and blurs and machine gun fire and multiple kinds of superpowers being used, and I wanted it to just be insane and just really intense and a lot happening.
One of the things I could appreciate is it could have been so easily, you could have overdone one part of it so much, and then it would have thrown everything off. But you had a great balance between the different styles and the flow-throughs of the panels, and that just, and with creation, as with pencils and inks and everything as well, it was just, that was a beautiful flow-through on the creative side.
I have to thank Gene on that also, number one, of course, because of the original art, and also because I went back and forth with him on the colors a lot in this action sequence, making things look just so.
There was an assumption that we were actually taking stills from a movie or something like that, or doing photos of it, and there were discussions along the lines of, okay, the camera's moving in this direction, so the camera might have a blur from this, but the figure's moving in this direction, so say the ground will look like it's standing still, or the character looks like he's standing still because the camera's following the figure as he lands on the ground and thumps. But the ground will be shaking, and everything behind him will be shaking. But the character is the one thing that isn't blurred in this scene. Things like that.
Yeah.
They CC'd me in on that discussion. I was completely lost.
We didn't get many comments on Lowell in that conversation.
Yeah.
It's like, what are you guys talking about?
But Lowell and the editors were instrumental in those scenes, in coming up with all of the background characters whose Subject Zero kills. And we did a lot of work coming up with that list. I'm not sure how many people actually recognize people beyond the almost Banes.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
There's the Atomic Skull.
The Moon Dancers.
That's right, Moon Dancers. There's Thunder and Lightning.
Yeah, the Teen Titans version.
Yeah.
Right,
okay.
Yeah. And I think there's somebody else. No?
Because we had to find characters that would have been appropriate to that late 80s, early 80s period.
Yeah, Gangbuster.
Yeah.
Gangbuster, that's right.
How cool
Yeah, a
is
female gangbuster.
Yeah, and I came with this huge elaborate backstory on how Bane was originally kind of a Captain America experiment gone wrong, but in Latin America. And if there's one of him, there's no reason why there couldn't be a bunch of less successful, other versions of him that are running around to Latin American countries too. So.
Yes, and this is the kind of thing that Gene does. He gives you this long thing. And, okay, we got this Latin American Bane project. We could have this. And that's the reason why he could be here. And editors are like, okay, yeah, just draw that. Thank you.
And you go through all that creative process and that creative thought just to kill him off.
Yes.
Yeah.
Gene and Art, one of the things I've always appreciated about your partnerships when you've worked on projects together has been the quality of the special effects. And I don't know, on your end, I know, Art, we've talked about this times before with your color work, just the quality of special effects that go in there. But for me as a fan, I'm a big film fan. And one of the things, I've been reading comics since, I'm 40, I've been reading comics since I was a little kid, so for, over 35 years I've been enjoying comic work. But it never ceases to amaze me. Like when I read this book, as I was going through it, I was blown away by special effects, especially there's this really pivotal sequence where he's hiding that he has, the super hearing and the X-ray vision. These are things that, this is the first sign of him isolating himself a little bit from everybody. And I thought it was just such a pivotal emotional moment for us to see what he was experiencing that would further add to his psychological damage as he was going along, so to speak. And I just thought that visual sequence with the dialogue just worked so well. Is it something on your end when you're doing special effects like superpowers and showing X-ray vision and things like that, does it take longer for you guys to do that? Because on the visual end for me, I was like, oh my God, how did they do that? That was something that I found that stunning because you see the transparency of their bodies, which was, I thought, a really important tiny detail, but not just them, the furniture. has all the transparency as well. I just thought that was really great.
Gene drew all those X-ray images. I just sort of did some tints on them and adjusted some different brightness, darkness, some blurring effects. But the X-ray drawings themselves, Gene did those, and that's just another example of the extent that Gene goes to in his craft.
Well, and that you've got two different kinds. You've got both the sort of the N-ray and the X-ray. There are two different vision things that Gene worked out the palette for.
I'll just say that I'm now going to slam everyone who I respect in comic book art, but I've never enjoyed anyone else's portrayal of X-ray vision. I always thought it was a little bit weak, where it just looked like, oh yeah, and then we have a camera behind the other, that can see a liver, and it's perfectly lit, so it looks just like a normal liver, and it's all red and stuff like that, and the bones are white. And I'm just like, that's not what X-ray vision should look like. It should look much, much cooler than that and much stranger.
Well, it did look like it was something, I used the term special effects. It reminded me of something that I would see in a film, and I'd go, oh, that is cool. And, I don't use that lightly, because that's something, this was very cinematic for me as I was going through. It had, all the emotional drama of a film. And I thought that was really important to my relationship with Sinclair as a reader, as I was going through to kind of experience things, quote unquote, through his eyes. I'm really not trying to do a play on words there, but that was really what I felt like as I was going through, and I wanted to make sure I noted that, even with the dialogue, kind of, because the dialogue shifts through in the final product. We don't see it at first, but that's, him focusing his hearing on there. I just loved how all of it, the entire creative team just kind of seemed to gel together on that, and it just made for a really cool experience in like 3 panels there, and I was just blown away by that.
For my part, I remember working really hard on that, on strengthening the relationship. On the page you're talking about, this doesn't have page numbers, but where you've got the 3 panels on the left-hand side, which are close-ups of Subject Zero, and then on the right-hand side, you've got the X-rays. In other instances of the X-ray or the N-ray vision, I made a point of making it as clear as possible what was going on, and also, for instance, on this page, as Subject Zero's, as he's more able to refine what he's seeing, on the left-hand side, I lit those panels differently, and Gene drew this more like a zooming in. Yeah, I just tried to make it really clear and make it interesting, and to try to give a sense of like zooming in, to try to add like a 3-dimensionality to it, sort of.
It was funny how Sinclair so early on was trying to hold on to his humanity, and that was something that I think throughout the entire story, through the dialogue and the visuals, I loved the decision, like his dialogue turned red after his change, and his word balloons were like the normal shape, but we saw an evolution in his visual style. His hair was different. He was bulkier. This was somebody who'd been through this experiment that obviously just enhanced him altogether. But by the end of the issue, we had seen like his power levels start to kick up, the more that he was using them. I like that, because we got to see like 27 years ago, and he's in there, no problem, we got this, guys, and everyone's ignoring him at this point. But that those red word balloons, but it's not just the color of the balloons, it was the design of them. They started to show a sense of that his voice has changed. He's becoming less human, and the people around him are becoming wary. Even we see this with Sam Lane's reaction to him. I thought was really pivotal. In Sam's facial expression, because there was a warmth to Sam's relationship with him early on, and it was something that I just really appreciated throughout this whole thing, because I think it's pivotal to understanding how Cal is the opposite of him. Because he's coming at it from a different viewpoint, because Cal's this alien that comes to our world, and he's kind of seeing our world for the first time. Whereas you got this guy who was raised in our world, is watching all this destruction going on, and is growing slowly more and more disconnected from our world. We're seeing Cal become connected for the first time. I loved seeing just the opposite journeys, and that was something that I just really appreciated. Where did the choices come in to so visually show, on all levels, Sinclair's evolution? Because it really was across the board, and not just visually, like through the dialogue, too. Where did that... How early in the process did that come into it?
I think for my thing is, once we kind of knew that it was Doomsday, I should go back. Actually, Gene had first talked about that when we were first talking about Bizarro clones, and there would be some changes there and some visual evolution. And then once we knew it was Doomsday, Gene had a lot of great ideas, and I just kind of sort of backed him up on that, that he wanted to have that visual thing. And I have to say, the letterer, we gave them notes that, okay, once we get to this point, we would like the lettering to look different. And that's going to have to be one step up, and then the next thing is going to have to be another step up, and enough that they would have some room to keep building on that. And the letterers just did a fabulous job. Fabulous.
Yeah. And, sometimes letterers don't care that much because, frankly, they're not given royalties. So I'll also say that a lot of colorists don't care either because they're not given royalties. But, we got really, really lucky with the whole creative.
They did a great job.
Carter Hall, scientific genius from a far-off world, flies into action as Hawkman.
There's a cover I actually want to comment on, Gene. Issue 2. Did you... I love your signatures, and I've gotten into this as a fan over time. I start to look for favorite creators' little signature designs. Did you deliberately do like a mirror image to the left of Superman on there? Because there is one, like, on the visual. You see Cal banging on the cage, I guess, in...
the big plexiglass door.
Yeah, and on the plexiglass, there's, on the right-hand side, it's your signature. And on the left-hand side, there is a faint image of your signature there. Was that done on purpose as a reflection, or how did that come? Or was it just an accident, or how did that happen?
It might have been an accident. I may have actually mirror imaged the thing so I could get the effect the same, and just forgot that I'd ghosted up later. Now, usually in my covers, when I color my own covers, I often do little fancy Photoshop layer effects with my signature, so that they don't just pop out as this crisp graphic on top of, say, a brick wall or something like that, and just don't look like they belong there. So I may have mirror imaged it and then done that in accident. But I'm glad it worked with the themes I was trying to get to anyway.
Yeah. Well, and that's issue 2 that Gene did and redid and did variations on that cover multiple times.
Yeah, as the larger Flashpoint project evolved, we got new notes on things that had to be brought forth and done. And each of the 3 covers had various versions because new notes would come up and I'd have to change elements like the teenage Subject Zero was on the first cover. And then we were told, oh, no, there never was a teenage Subject Zero. He came in as an adult and kind of like, well, damn, I already finished up the first cover. So I had to repaint that, and it was a bear.
As a fan, I want to say that I really love the signatures on the covers. And this is just for any artists out there and comic companies. And I'm glad that we're seeing, when they're going through the creative teams inside the book, a reference to who did the cover, whether it's the variant cover or the original cover, because those are things that I seek out now because I really enjoy the artwork and enjoy seeing that. But I'm a fan of the signatures, so I love that you do that. It's something that I just think is terrific. I love looking for it, and seeing where it's going to be at. It's kind of a fun little... just kind of nod as a fan. I'm all for anything that adds value to my experience reading a comic, and I love rereading and going back through, looking at the art a different way, reading the dialogue a different way. It's something that I did as a kid that I've gotten back into now as an adult, and I think it's just helped me to appreciate just the sheer amount of time all of you put into the work, because I noticed little tiny things that I didn't notice before. So it's funny how the signature thing, I noticed it just because I spent so much time looking at the cover because it was cool.
I'll just say that, it's part of my experience as a comic artist is that I sit around and I'll watch seasons of my favorite TV shows over and over and over again. And if they did a really great job, like, say, like Sopranos does, where they work on every detail so everything makes sense, and every character's motivation makes sense, I really appreciate that on the 10th time I've watched that episode. And this has changed how I look at all stories, so that I'll drive a little crazy with small details of saying, oh, no, if somebody reads this 4 times in a row, on the 4th time they're sure to notice such and such detail, and therefore we need to fix it.
I really liked that each issue started off with hearing things from Subject Zero first, kind of like his perspective and just seeing how deranged he'd become as it was going along over the time. Issue 2 was, for me, one of the interesting parts was this is where our focus on Cal really started. And really where the book took a direction that I was thinking one thing, as far as I mentioned earlier, about following Sinclair. And when I picked up issue 2, now my focus became on Cal and this kind of vying for Cal's soul. Because we were looking at the redemption of Sam Lane, where Sam was trying to get it right this time because he got it so wrong before. And Sinclair, where he was looking at an opportunity for a brother he could manipulate, the younger brother he could send down the same path that he was going on to kind of prove that his ideas are right and that everybody else is ultimately wrong. And I just really loved just the way that this whole story with Cal played out, because I was I wasn't sure what to expect on this. I was like, am I going to get a story that feels like a classic Superman story and feels very Elseworld Superman, or was it going to be like kind of Sinclair was going to be my focus? By the end of this, because of the way Cal was introduced here and just how the journey went with the two vying for him, I really felt like this was just a really cool classic Superman story that was very satisfying at the end in 2 issues, because you really had 2 issues now to develop Cal. And you really did a great job on that, because you didn't have oversized issues like, Lowell was mentioning earlier. You were really confined to 2 standard issues to get that job done.
Mm-hmm. I'm going to ask Lowell something here, which I just suddenly realized, because I realized throughout this whole process I'm a little bit of a Colonel Kurtz figure. Were you influenced at all by Apocalypse Now, the movie?
I wouldn't say so. No. No, I mean, I've seen Apocalypse Now, and I've seen the various takes on Heart of Darkness. I probably watched more of the alternate versions of that than the straight stuff. But I know that doesn't occur to me. It's more of a general archetype than anything.
Because it sure feels like our personal experience was a little bit Apocalypse Now, too, so... or at least Heart of Darkness.
Well, there's an interesting thing that happens in issue 2 is, I mentioned before that we were given the note sort of late in the process that, okay, Superman lands at the end of issue 1, and we had to kind of go back and rewrite everything. One of the notes we got on issue 2, fairly late in the process, was, oh, by the way, Superman can't fight Subject Zero in the 2nd issue. He, period, can't, there can be no actual physical conflict between them, which I will admit when I read that, I was like, what? Because we had sketched it out that way, and that made me go back and take that obstruction and really think about, okay, well, what's at stake here? And make me maybe bring Lane more into the picture and focus on the more sort of emotional and sort of family dynamic that was going on there. So it was one of those changes that allowed me and forced me to do, I think, richer character development.
It's interesting how art thrives on restrictions.
In some cases.
Yeah.
Well, it really worked for me, because just seeing him do his little mental game that he was playing, and he's like, yeah, that's it, Cal. Don't give them what they want, knowing that Cal's going to get punished and something bad's going to happen to him, just kind of that feeding it. And that really just had me anticipating and really excited for the fight sequence that happened in 3, because I'm like, oh yeah, come on, Cal, unload on this guy.
Well, and I think that whole idea of sort of the sort of awful big brother whispering in your ear kind of thing is a super creepy kind of villain thing, and a kind of real thing. If you had a sibling who's been pushing or prodding you, or bad friends who've been kind of saying, hey, yeah, you should do this, and the peer pressure thing, it's all part of that. And actually, when I told my wife what I was planning with that, she was like, oh, that's really unpleasant.
Well, I'm the youngest of 4 children.
Oh.
So I know all about the older brothers who get you in trouble and have you do this and that. And hey, Jim, take care of this. Both my brothers, especially my oldest Bill, he liked to, he was the foreman of the job. And being the youngest, I was the worker bee. I was the one who got stuck with a lot of the physical labor, and Bill's there making sure I do it correctly. And I joke because I know he's listening, by the way. So just let me clarify that.
One of my sense of wonders about this, and about Superman in general, I think when Superman's done right, one of the things I love is it's this amazingly cool world. And even when you do something a little more dark and twisted like this, where it's because of the environment he's put in, I love, like, this exploration of young Cal, like, really, like, little kid. I remember Super Baby as a kid and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. And you get to see him in this world where, Super Baby's getting beat on by little robots and that. But I loved, because we don't get to see that side of him too often. A lot of times your origins of Superman jump to Superboy or older. You don't get a lot of exploration of these years. And I really found something endearing about seeing him being tested with the robots, seeing his innocence, like that childlike innocence. It immediately connected me with him, where I don't always feel that with Superman. Sometimes he's cold and distant, like he's almost too godlike. And I think it's more interesting to me when I see the reveal that he is this godlike person if you got to know his humanity first, what that was like. And I really liked that about this, because we see an innocence to him before, like, the big, this is what he really is. I mean, you guys don't get it. This is like, give him the sun, and you are dealing with God-like power there. And I always liked that kind of duality of the character. That innocence was something I thought all of you conveyed real well in all this. How important to you was it to portray him in the younger stages as being like this kind of blank slate? There wasn't like an evil tone to him. There was something good, because Sinclair walked in obviously with so much life history.
Well, I'll hand most of this to Gene, but I just tried to, he's indoors all the time, and so I gave him a pale complexion. Really, I just hand the rest off to Gene, because Lowell was saying earlier, maybe it was you, Jim, talking about the great work that Gene does with facial expressions, and especially important here in this part of the story with young Cal. And a lot of comic book artists, I think, don't draw kids well. Mm-hmm. Gene's young Cal looks like an 8-year-old kid or a 10-year-old kid.
Well, as does his Lois. Lois Lane, when she first comes in as a little girl, I think looks great. And Gene and I had batted back and forth. We had seen that proposal for Lois Lane, Girl Detective, that had floated around the net. And so we had that in the back of our minds when we went to that page, and she looks great.
Yeah, I would have completely stolen the look from Lois Lane, Girl Reporter, except I remembered that late in the design process, this is like supposed to be like 1985 or something like that, or 1987 or whatever, or not, it's about 1990. No, it's about 1990, and kids didn't dress like that back then. So, but that was a big inspiration for what the eventual look was.
Mm-hmm. Well, and you talk about the innocence. One of the first things that we had talked about is Gene and I had talked about what are the implications of someone being isolated, and that sort of desire for warmth and desire for human contact. And how important that was. And we talked about various degrees of what autism looked like, and how facial expressions get mapped, and about the fact that we do have a kid here who, while he is kind of isolated from human contact, through his various super senses can pick up a lot of really awful things from the world, and trying to figure out how to bring that all together. I would say in my original writing of it, I had the character actually even more blank, and Gene came back and said, no, I think we need to put some more expression in there. And, of course, I was worried that, he would like go too much the other way. But, of course, it's Gene, so he does it perfectly.
And, I mean, in a sense, you have to understand that this young Kal-El is very, very much just a normal kid growing up isolated inside of an abusive family. And kids growing up in that situation learn, hide your emotions on your face. Always listen in on what the grown-ups are doing, and figure out what they really want you to do as opposed to what they're telling you to do, all these different things. And I didn't have to really stretch that far into the fantasy realm to figure out his characterization.
I loved your handling of Crypto. I felt so bad for Crypto all the way through. I love that Cal, it's the boy and his dog. And I love that was still an aspect of it. But then seeing what happened to him, where he was being taunted by Sinclair, and after he'd been so clearly abused, he's in this collar and he's malnourished clearly, and they're keeping him weak on purpose. But when he lets loose in that whole sequence, I was first of all, I feel bad that we see arms in his mouth still and everything like that after everything's been through. But I really liked its establishment of this dog at least getting something before he gets taken down, because I so would have been happy if this all turned out with everybody was done for in that whole facility except for Crypto.
It really was one of the first things we picked out of the Flashpoint number 3 script was, okay, well, we know Crypto's dead. How do we do that in a way that actually mattered to the plot? Because I like that character. I mean, I like super animals. I hate to say this, as dopey as it sounds, but I love that concept of the various super pets. And Art and Gene and I have talked about that. And I was disappointed when I saw that Marvel did a whole Legion of Super Pets book a while back. But in terms of the Crypto scene, that was one of the places where we got notes to kind of really darken it up. We did so.
In fact, we then later got a note saying, yeah, can you undarken it just a little bit? Having Lex Luthor's intestines flying around the panel, that's not good.
Yeah, there's a panel that had to get redone.
Yeah, it's...
on the last day.
Oh, that's right. That's right. Yeah.
Because and that was one of those things where I had originally said, okay, well, why don't we show this off screen? There were suggestions that no, because of the nature of Flashpoint Universe, we wanted to actually have a little more visceral material there, literally and figuratively, and then we had to kind of scramble on that.
Yeah, Eddie Berganza enjoys gore the way little kids enjoy gummy worms.
I don't think you want to say that.
It's true. It's kind of like if it's done cool in an entertaining manner, it's kind of like, oh, that's gross. It's like if you wave a wet gummy worm in front of a kid. You can amuse them very much that way.
I'm writing this down here. Let's see. Eddie
Berganza has a very direct, very funny sense of humor, and just things like that are just like hilarious to him.
You were talking about super pets, Lowell, and I've always thought, like, what kid wouldn't want a super dog? There's something really primal about that. And also, the sequence with Crypto, also, it's interesting in how it's like another example or a parallel of what happens with Subject Zero and what could happen to Cal.
Yeah.
One of the things I got to say, first off, this was absolutely beautiful gore. This was a 2-page spread that just... One had me going, whoa, and the other breath going, yes! Just, while I agree, I love Crypto, but this was absolutely beautiful gore. It was just, you see the bits and the body parts, the blood splatter, and then interwoven it is a cool story going on, because, one, I just want to get some confirmation. Lionel threw Lex at Crypto, correct?
Oh, yes.
Okay.
Threw him to the dogs, literally.
Yes.
Totally Lowell's inspiration.
I love that. That was like, he's like, no, Lex, don't move. Yeah, there you go. That was beautiful, man. When they take down Crypto, is that a kryptonite laser that they're using?
Okay, Gene, are we going to talk about this?
We might as well. I think at this point we can just be open.
Okay, go ahead.
In the early days of when the first Flashpoint books came out, there was a comic, can't remember where he was. He's probably pretty easy to Google, who commented on all these minor supporting characters from the DCU getting knocked off, bang, 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 in all the number ones. And he's saying, what are you guys going to do next? Are they going to take Crypto behind a shed and shoot him with a kryptonite shotgun? Now, at this point, I had already drawn Crypto being killed with a spear and some type of power spear device. But then I contacted the editors, and they said, we want nothing to do with it. And then I contacted Art, and he said, I'm in. I redrew the scene and did a kryptonite shotgun with the name of the blogger on the shotgun saying, this is your fault he's getting killed with a shotgun instead of a spear.
Oh, that's so funny.
That is awesome.
Yeah, it's Murphy on the side of the shotgun.
Murphy.
Oh, I see it there. That's awesome. That is so awesome. I love that there's a story behind it. This is like a DVD Easter egg. Murphy did it.
It's his fault. I really enjoyed on these 2 pages and also the big action sequence at the end of the first issue. I really enjoyed trying to figure out how to capture this idea, the intensity of this crazed creature moving at superhuman speed with superpower and just going crazy, and using blurs and reds and like adding extra sprays of blood on what Gene had already drawn. But I enjoyed trying to figure out how to make this work and where to use blurs and not to use blurs and where to use just flat colors. Like in that panel that Gene had to redraw, the second panel on the second page of that action scene. Initially, there was a lot more gore there, and I used this like flat, dark red as a way initially to try to kind of obscure that. But anyway, this action sequence was just kind of an interesting challenge from a coloring standpoint of keeping it interesting and doing different things with it, because there are a lot of beats on these 2 pages. Mm-hmm. And so I was trying to figure out like how to frequently shift gears. I
always like when you guys do the non-traditional panels, when you're doing, especially scenes like that, where you have the jagged outline with the blue, and then you go on to the next page when Lois is there. It's more of a traditional box panels. I always liked seeing those contrasts, and having it being it adds to the comic the presentation and just that theme and the emotional aspect to it.
Let me say something about that switch to if I can, and I'm going to start talking out of turn a little bit. But when I first saw this, I of course saw this as a PDF, and I saw that page where Crypto gets killed, and then I click and I flip and I see the page, and you see Lois sort of front and center, and I will tell you that the way Gene drew that, my heart just sank, because you go from this moment of absolute utter violence, and then next page, oh, here's a little girl, by the way. And I was like, oh, my God, they're going to kill her. Oh, wait, no, I don't kill her. It just visually flipping from one page to the next. Unfortunately, in the comic, you've got 2 pages of ads between. But it really is one of those moments where Gene's art and Art's colors just really absolutely punched me in the gut.
I'm going to say that there's a very specific use for the jagged panels, in which the jagged panels were the scenes where Subject Zero was taking control of the story. And therefore the story was starting to rip apart, and just the energies were kind of out of control. And when things are back under the control of one of the other characters, then it started to go back to rectangular panels again.
And that's another place where I tried using these cold blues, which I was associating with Subject Zero.
One of our listeners had a good question, and you guys started to answer, I think, with Crypto. How many of the characters from the Superman mythos story were, like, when your original plan, you were told, like, hey, you need to use Lois, you need to use Lionel, you need to use Lex, Crypto, and how many of them were ones where you looked at what was going on in Flashpoint and said, hey, it'd be neat to explore this, it'd be neat to expand upon this? Like, how much of that did you have to kind of fit in because you were told you needed to fit? Because I know there's usually a little bit of A, a little bit of B, and then you got to find creative ways to make that all work. What was that like?
Well, I'm going to say we were actually given very little in terms of requirements. Lois was a definitive requirement for us, which I love. I mean, I love Lois. In the timeline that we were given, essentially there's a date shown on the timeline that says Superman meets Lois when he briefly escapes from Project Superman. And that's like 1991 on the Flashpoint timeline. So we knew we had to have that, and if you have that, then obviously you want to have a callback to that in issue 3. So I knew we needed to use her. And other than that, we weren't told anybody. And in fact, the first sort of suggestions we had were not to use any of the big names from the Superman mythos because people might expect that. But we did go ahead and use Lex and Lionel just because it made sense in terms of the characters there. And we were able to mention Queen Industries there and get a tie-in to the whole Green Arrow thing.
Yeah, but actually we were told to tone down the use of Lex Luthor as a major character inside of the book because, like Lowell said, the editors warned that's a little bit too obvious. We don't want to just jump right away to what people are expecting.
I really appreciated the use of Lionel Luthor because I don't know how many other appearances he's had in recent years in DC Comics, but after watching Smallville, of that actor and then that character was one of the highlights of that show. Yeah,
and certainly that was one of the conversations that we had at C2E2 was how to get that depiction into the Flashpoint. The only other problem we actually had in terms of clearances was with, you see the character of Dr. Ridge there. That was a little bit of a problem because I have to kind of rewind here to tell this bit. You know that, of course, we had the Creature Commandos in the Flashpoint universe, and they're also jammed in a vault in Project Superman. But we weren't kind of told who the Creature Commandos were and their whole deal. The original of the scientist had been Dr. Rhodes, which is the name of the Medusa character from Creature Commandos. And we're like, okay, and so that's why she has the helmet, and Gene drew her with the various snaky bits when you see the X-ray stuff. Well, then as it turned out, we found out as we were doing issue 1 that, in fact, there is a Medusa character in the new Creature Commandos. Okay, we can't do that, so how do we work around that? And so that's why Dr. Rhodes then became the character you see there, Dr. Ridge, which is Dr. Linda Ridge, which is actually Dr. Linda Holland from Swamp Thing.
Oh, I didn't even know that part.
Didn't know that? Because
cool.
In the continuity, Linda Ridge worked for the Floronic Man before she ended up working with Alec Holland on the whole experiment and stuff, which is why then we got the plant guys in issue 2.
A bit of alternate history there. Okay.
Yes.
Improvise, adapt, and overcome.
Yeah.
In another bit of alternate history here, I'd like to point out on the page where Lois first appears on the wall of General Lane's office there, we have a President Al Haig.
That's right. I forgot about that.
Yeah, I kind of felt like Al Haig after fantasizing about being president so long and claiming after Reagan got shot, I'm in charge here now. You should finally get a chance to be in charge of the Flashpoint universe. So.
But to answer your question, no, they didn't give us much notes in terms of characters.
No, I actually loved where that went because that's a lot of what I was very curious as to what that looked like on your end. And I love that it was really kind of a, hey, if we're having this opportunity to explore this kind of scientific community and this whole world of Superman, why don't we try to bring in as much of the DCU into it to get... See, I'm a big fan of... I mentioned DVD Easter eggs earlier. I love the stuff that I catch myself, but then I love that, like I said, I've read this story multiple times now, and I love that you just introduced me to things that I missed. That there was more that was even there, because I think that's part of the comic experience that I think I always longed for as a kid, and I always liked when I went into comic shops that I was able to get, was those geeky discussions that you have with somebody else who caught that thing that you didn't, that kind of knows something that you don't because, maybe their reading experiences was different or something like that. And I think we get that with television. We get that with film. There's that something where, it takes your experience one step beyond. So I appreciate the time because you guys didn't have to do that. You could have just kept it very surface level. But instead, going that little extra mile gives us that something where we each catch some cool tidbit that like somebody else didn't, and it adds something. I don't know. I appreciate that.
Well, and I think comics. Gene pointed out to me that comics are a medium that supports that really rewards it in a way that perhaps novels and some other kinds of media forms don't offer that kind of experience, or at least don't offer it as easily and accessibly as a comic book does.
Yeah, comic books can handle essential story detail at a higher level than any other medium. Where you can do here's something you can do in a comic book that cannot be done in any other medium except possibly a video game that works like a comic book. You can have a mystery where one of the panels is just a large section of the white pages of a yellow pages book, just a long list of names and phone numbers, and that can be an essential clue. And you can't do that in other mediums. You can't do something like a scene where, in another scene, you have a setup panel, a big exposition panel where it's just a room of a murder scene, and you show the whole murder scene as a map, which you can then refer back and forth to as the story goes along. You can't include this kind of essential detail in any other medium. It's great that way.
Yeah, that's true.
You can flip back to it and look at it repeatedly.
Yeah,
and you can do it. You can do it quickly. That's the thing. See, you can have it in a video game, but in a video game, you'd have to go back to a save, or you'd have to move back to the room, or you'd have to, there'd be a whole set of mechanical motions you'd have to do, like in something like L.A. Noire or those games. That a comic book, it provides an accessibility to that set of structures.
Yeah, and you can play with that as much as you want. I'll say that like the new BBC Sherlock series would work much better as a well-done comic book than it does as a TV series.
That's interesting.
Mm-hmm. I would love
a really
to read
good
that.
series.
Yeah. Well, except for the ending.
Oh, well. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, don't.
We heard Bill Willingham go on at length about what he didn't like about that.
Oh, dear. I'm sorry.
No, it was good.
In the interest of Easter eggs, I'd like to hear Gene talk about the minions in the various labs of Project Superman.
Oh, you mean like the little kids who come flying out, or?
Yeah, at the beginning of
the lab assistants.
Yeah, the lab assistants, and there's at the beginning of number 2 in the room where Cal's powers are being tested, and also the lab assistants in the Japanese-looking gear, sort of.
Oh, okay, yeah. In the second book, in the first book, I wanted to be a little more restrained inside of how the lab assistants look, but I wanted them to look disconcerting and obviously not military. So, yeah, I had them look a little bit off, kind of like, do you know the name of that guy who does, like, Black Hole and all those other things?
Charles Burns?
Yeah, Charles Burns. I want to look like Charles Burns' characters. That kind of slightly off feeling to it, where it gets a little bit on the wrong side of the uncanny valley, and they don't quite look human anymore. Their eyes are just a little bit off and stuff. And in the second issue, because things are getting a little more further into the realm of the age of superheroes, at that point I just went full Kirby. And none of them are rip-offs of specific Kirby designs, but the design of every one of those characters is just a rip-off of massive amounts of Kirby themes and the design elements. And I just jammed as many as I could into there.
One of the things that I really liked in issue 2, when Sinclair was starting to manipulate Kal after the death of Krypto, was the choice that when Kal was looking through the walls during those 3 years that he was getting whispered in the ear and all that stuff, I loved that I don't know if it was subconsciously because of what happened to Krypto, but I loved that he got to see different animals being experimented on. That was something that was a focus of his. Because we see a situation where there's two opportunities for Kal here. There's an opportunity to go down the path of Sinclair and, go to escape and follow through on Sinclair. Or there's an opportunity for Kal to go down a more righteous path. And it really looks like from the setup that this is where Kal's going to turn. Kal's going to sit there and say, look what they've done to me, look what they did to my dog. These are pivotal events where, I'm being poked and prodded and stuck with things. This is my world, and this guy is right. I mean, look what they're doing, these horrible things that they're doing. I loved that he visualized animals, though, at that moment, because for me it connected with what happened with poor Krypto.
It occurs to me, I wonder how much of the way that Kal turns out in terms of being, basically good, how much of that is him. We were talking earlier about Subject Zero being like an older brother. I'm wondering if there's an element of, on Kal's part, the desire to be able to step out from under the shadow of an older sibling and to not be like.
That's an interesting read on that. I hadn't thought of it that way.
I did look at it as being he was seeking, which fits a lot of what you're saying, Art, and builds on it. I saw a lot of Kal wanting Dad's approval, especially when he meets kind of younger sister in Lois Lane, because at the age where they meet each other there's kind of that relationship. He sees the cake, and I loved you saw him, like, when he zooms into the room, the cake is like his first focus when he was there. and you start to see, like, right away that I think that was how he kind of gathered the relationship of Lois, because, that was kind of his first meeting. That wasn't kind of his, that was his first meeting with her. So, he's like looking at that and recognizing, like the cake, and probably something that he connected with Sam Lane from his childhood, because Sam obviously was acting like a father figure. So I don't know, there was something about that moment where I'm like, this moment where he met Lois is kind of pivotal in choosing his direction. There was a possibility of him following Big Brother there, and there is some of that there. This is where he steps out of his shadow. This is where he goes for more of Dad's approval because of the younger sister and seeing a different path. I don't know. It was kind of interesting how deep this short sequence really got very fast, where I was like looking so beyond the page because of what was happening here, and I loved that about this book. Issue 2 was really where it started kicking it up a notch for me, as far as it really made my rereads a whole lot different when I started seeing where that direction of the story went. I looked at issue 1 totally different.
Good.
I want to let Lowell talk about this, what happens on those pages, but then after he does that, I just want to talk about some of the visual stuff we were doing on that page, where Lois and Kal first meet.
Well, I think it is that we were still kind of in that idea of a first sort of real physical contact. We have that moment in issue 1 where Sinclair reaches out to touch General Lane, and General Lane pulls back from contact. And then here in issue 2, we have another moment where we have Kal kind of moving towards having that contact interrupted. And I think that importance of making contact with other people, of establishing attachment, and that's a theme that I kind of come back to a couple of times. So is about, what do we gain from attaching ourselves to other people? What are the costs to that? And I think Gene does a remarkable job of conveying those little subtle bits there.
If you look at the first issue, before Sinclair becomes Subject Zero, in all the scenes where the General and the Lieutenant show up together, they're very close and they oftentimes overlap. And then after that, after Sinclair becomes Subject Zero, they never overlap again until, of course, Sinclair kills him. And then also, I just wanted to say on the scene where Lois and Kal-El first meet, Kal-El has never seen a birthday cake before. In fact, I doubt he's even seen a pastry at all. So the only thing that this will look like to him is a giant baseball.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Gene drew that to look like a baseball.
Oh, cool.
So, and the scene you're talking about where he runs to the cake and looking at it, there's a sword hanging over his head, and there's this giant baseball. It's a bigger baseball than he's ever seen before, right in front of his face.
That was awesome, because I was I actually found myself looking back to see if it was a baseball, and I think because of my experience with birthday cakes, I'm like, well, okay, it's not a baseball, because I was wondering if that was the first initial connection that he made. I love how you did that, because I did think baseball. I'm going to admit that, like, then I talked myself out of it, which was kind of funny, because I know what a birthday cake is. So I'm not Cal. I love that, though. I mean, that was kind of neat.
Now, I liked how you guys used the Phantom Zone, by the way. That, just the Phantom Zone generator, because when he first shows up with it, my initial thought was the Green Lantern, with the Manhunter, their weaponry, and I'm like, but there's no way the government could have that. So I was like, what is that? And it was one of those, what is it? And then when he says Phantom Zone, I'm like, oh, of course. It was one of those moments where I actually smacked myself in the head and said, oh, why didn't I think of that?
Well, and actually, we didn't even have that line with the ever hear of the Phantom Zone in there, and one of the editors put that in, and I think that does a nice job of clarifying what's going on there, which I'm glad of.
There's a lot going on here in these 2 pages where Subject Zero blasts into the room on Lois and Clark, and then this whole thing with Lane. I'm not sure if it works, but I was really messing around a lot with colors on these 3 pages.
Oh yeah, no, I like it.
Okay, thanks.
It was another moment where I rooted for Sam Lane, and again realized that this guy could have really been a great dad if he had seen like his whole life role as being that, because he sacrifices himself for his kids, which he'll do that for his job. We've seen that in the comics. As a general, he's willing to die for his role as a general. But I don't know, like, if he would have sacrificed himself for Lois, for example. Yet in this case, because Cal was there, I think maybe for the first time he sees kind of Lois the same way he sees Cal in those when he says, stay away from my children. It's funny how that sequence maybe lets him see his daughter maybe for the first time the way he should have. I don't know. I really loved that moment where I'm like, for the first time, I really in this, and I love that I'm saying that about Sam Lane, yet I don't feel he's any different from the Sam Lane that I've always read. Like, I can see that is still the same man, but the circumstances in this world have just put him in a position where he can sort of be a better man. He can take his role that he should have always taken seriously, and we get a chance to see what that would have been like for him.
And that's what the best alternate history stuff, the best alternate world stuff, and there are some great ones out there, should do that kind of thing. Should feel like, okay, yeah, I see how this falls out naturally from that idea, but it's still the same person.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting how this act on Lane's part clearly has a huge influence on Cal. He comes in and says, step away from my children, which automatically essentially equates Cal and Lois as brother and a sister, and both as children of Lane. And then he says, stay there, kids. We have to protect people from monsters like this. Then Lane dies, basically. And this has to be a huge influence on Cal and on how Cal sees his role later on.
With the New 52, rumors that we as fans have heard about things like JSA, and then Multiversity, I know, is still on the table as Grant Morrison's miniseries coming up about the multiverse. I'm hoping that things like that open up the opportunity for, you guys were mentioning your Elseworlds pitch, and I'm hoping that opens up the opportunity down the road for more Elseworlds stories, to do more of things like this, because I always enjoyed that about Elseworlds. I think it's something that it's a rich area of the DC Universe. Some of my favorite stories, since Elseworlds were first introduced, in those early Batman ones, straight on through, were Elseworlds books, because you really got creators having a chance to really take a look at the core concepts of these characters, what make them work, and really kind of, put their own spin on them without feeling restricted to they have to play out exactly like they do in our universe. That's something that I really always enjoyed about this. This worked in this series so well because I feel like this is great Superman without you having to stick to this is the way Superman stories got to go. And yet I can still get those Superman stories, those ones that I'm talking about where this is the way Superman's got to go. I like that kind of duality of the whole thing.
Well, you were at that speech that Dan Didio did at C2E2. And I thought his point that he made there was about talking about Flashpoint, because people were grumbling about it. He said, well, we've always heard that people like Elseworlds books, but they don't like that they get done and then we don't do anything with them. Flashpoint is an exercise in taking a concept, running with it, and really playing it out and doing a full-fledged kind of exploration of that gives you guys the depth that you want, while at the same time not knocking the regular books out of continuity. And as a concept, I think that's great. And I think it's unfortunate, perhaps, that then that got so tied to, oh, well, this is the lead-in for 52. I think that link-up may have diminished Flashpoint. And I certainly have seen some reviewers who clearly don't like the structure of it, not necessarily because they don't like Elseworlds, but because they don't like how they perceived it being the setup to 52. And I think that's maybe a little tough for us.
I actually will argue with them heavily because, yeah, the end result was that it provided a point for Flash to set up a new universe, yes, but that's kind of the epilogue of the whole thing. That's not the gist of the story. And not arguably, one of the things that I really enjoyed about all the minis, each mini on its own felt like very contained. Like, I read these in very unique ways. Like, there were some that I read, like the first issue when they came out, I read it right away, and then I reread it again. There were others where, because of all the books that I do read, I read like issue 1 and 2 together. Because we do this podcast too, so, we might have been focusing on something for a podcast episode. So I might have, read 2 issues of the Flashpoint tie-in together. I love that I didn't ever feel at any point in time through any of these minis like I had to read any of them at the same time that I was reading the main Flashpoint series. They had their own complete, this is very well crafted as its own unique story. It echoes what's going on in Flashpoint. I thought the nice editorial balloons in certain places that reference, this is, take a look over here if you want to see more with this, or take a look over there if you want to do that. I've always been a fan of that. Mm-hmm. But there was nothing in this that I felt like I need to read book A to get what you guys are doing in here. This is very contained. It's a great story on its own. But then, there is something that does connect to that when I want to embrace that aspect of it. I don't have to do that at any level, though. So I love this because it felt like, for me, talking about the love for Elseworlds, it felt like I was getting, after having a drought of it, a whole bunch of Elseworlds. I've been longing for this. I don't care whether it ties into the current events or, or if they're just contained, and I don't feel like they have to continue on and on. I feel like as a reader, I should want them to because they were good. Like this, I want to know more about this kid's world. I would love to see where this kid goes from here because I enjoyed it so much. But like any Elseworlds, if I get lucky enough for that to happen in the future and I get to read more stories with this kid, fantastic. If I don't, I'll be thrilled that, like any other Elseworlds story that I look back to and I enjoyed, that I got to experience it this way. And that's what I think Elseworlds has always been all about, and people who critique that, I don't think get Elseworlds.
Mm-hmm. Well, one of the advantages of Elseworlds, of course, is that they can have an ending. The main character, Superman or Batman or whatever, can die at the end or make a different kind of decision. I think everybody likes Elseworlds. I assume and hope that DC will continue or restart doing, at least utilizing their multiverse or the idea of a multiverse.
Do any of you guys like classic Doctor Who and Fringe and things like that, those kind of shows? Or
Oh, yeah.
Fringe,
a big Doctor Who guy. I started watching Doctor Who back Tom Baker era when it was first coming on, and read all the novels and collected those. And oh yeah,
I was a big fan of the Pertwee story Inferno, where it took place on an alternate world. The Doctor was trapped on our Earth for like a long time. He was trapped there, and then he got the TARDIS sort of working again, which was typical with the Doctor. And his time machine, for anybody that doesn't know what I'm talking about, flips a switch on it and it sends him to an alternate world where it's everybody that's the supporting cast that we've been following on the show in variations because they were on this world. And I've always loved that in TV and film, and that was a self-contained story. There was a whole history to that world that we don't know. You get bits and pieces of it in the story. I would love to, as a geeky fan, I would love to have known how that whole world, like, how everything happened in that whole world. That's something that I get into. But, you're not going to get that story because that was a contained episode. It was multiple episodes, but it was like 5 or 6, I forget at the time.
Yeah, it was a good arc.
Yeah. And, I love that kind of stuff because I think because it was a well-crafted story, I wanted more. And I think that's, I think as a fan why I've always liked Elseworlds because I've been so exposed to that, not just in comics, but in media in general. Fringe has like 2 universes going on in it right now.
Yeah,
and
Fringe has done a really good job of that. They've even gone so far as to have an episode, at least one episode, that took place entirely in the alternate universe with the alternate universe characters. And they even had a different...
opening.
Yeah, a different opening credit sequence.
I'll say... among sort of science fiction prose, the master of the alternate world short story is a guy named Howard Waldrop. And if you haven't read his stuff is just brilliant for doing that kind of thing. And before I went to write this, I went back and reread everything I could that I had of his. And actually my sister was at a convention just recently and I gave him a copy of the book to read. As a gamer, I had to go back to RPGs, but for us, we've done a lot of Elseworld-style RPG play where we're able to kind of set up a slightly different universe and play out characters, and see how they evolve differently. Art's done that actually literally in at least a couple of the games I have with superheroes.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
The fact that one of the things we bonded over when we were teenagers was DC Heroes. We have to take the DC Universe and shove it in a totally different direction. Is a very close parallel to what we just did this summer.
Yeah, honestly, doing this kind of Elseworlds thing, it is like coming up with a whole new RPG setting. So, there's our goober talk.
There they are, all alone, except for that old character.
Were you told in each issue, because issue 3 is the one I'm looking at right now, and one of the things that I really appreciated with issue 3, there was this establishment of how he escaped. And it references back to what was happening in Flashpoint. And this is why I said this is very self-contained, because you give us right in that first page, through the eyes of Sinclair, what's happening in Flash. And I like that. I again, talking about alternate worlds, I love seeing a reality from another perspective, like him watching what's happening. You get to see the Phantom Zone, like him. What does it look like from the Phantom Zone when he's looking out? This is where he gets pulled back in because the heroes were trying to free Cal and get him recruited to their team because Barry said this is what they needed. This led inadvertently to them releasing this world's doomsday archetype, Superman's big threat. And I love that. That was something that but was that something that you were told to do, or was that something you just felt, hey, this is a great time to be able to bring this sequence in? Because you gave me everything I needed. And like I said, I never felt with any of, this is true of all the Flashpoint tie-ins, something I really appreciated that you did here, that I could read this at my leisure in my way and enjoy this because you gave me the reference point that I needed. How did that come about?
Oh, we weren't given any specific instructions on it. I think we just knew. I knew that we had that weird transition with what happened in issue 3, and I had to figure out how to get that in and done with as quickly as possible. And of course, the narration parallels on the first page of each issue, so I knew we had to come back to Sinclair. And what did Sinclair see? It worked particularly well, I think, there.
It's always an interesting exercise when you have to figure out how to express something as concisely as possible and really boil it down. That's always challenging, but interesting.
Yeah, and there was, we did put, I think, a lot of effort into trying to make everything tie in with everything we could find out about the rest of the Flashpoint event. Lowell and I both kind of poured over all the main Flashpoint series scripts and picked out every little detail we'd get from it that related to our stuff. We, on the side, made contacts with the Lois Lane team to find out what they were up to, where Lois Lane would be at every point in time, and just making sure that we could finish up her arc properly.
Let us say that I had a nice, very long conversation on the phone, on Skype with Andy Lanning, who was super nice. And at that point, I hadn't seen the scripts for Flashpoint 4 or 5, and he sent those on to me and really helped me out. And he and I went back and forth on things and allowed us to get what I hope is a very nice ending to the Lois Lane arc.
I kind of liked with 3 in Flashpoint 3, where when they do bust out Clark, the first thing he does is he just takes off. And when I read it, in Flashpoint, I was like, I kind of was laughing because I didn't know the full story, his full backstory yet, because when that came out, and there was just so it was kind of a cool thing to see why he was going, where he was going, what he was actually doing. He wasn't running away from the heroes. They were not even existent. He was going to Lois. He was doing what he promised, doing what General Lane told him to do to protect her. And I thought that was just a great, seeing the full story arc for him, and just a nice connection between them.
Well, and interestingly, the note we sort of got from Jeff Johns originally on that was, or I can't remember if it was him or for one of the editors, who was that we would have to tie this into Superman's "I'm out of here, bitches" moment from issue 3. So clearly they pictured it sort of that same way, and the trick was how to make that choice not look like kind of a dick move,
See, I took it as, and you guys really establish it well, the innocence of this character. Mm-hmm. He doesn't. With Superman that we're used to, grew up being the Kansas farm boy. He knew people. He knew through Pa Kent, a sense of right and wrong. He got some of that through Sam, and I thought that was what was great. Sam gave him kind of a foundation piece, but he hasn't had a chance to act on any of it. This isn't the Superman that was doing helpful things on the Smallville farm. You knew that he was rescuing people as a kid growing up and having that kind of life to him. He hasn't had any of that. So I loved that. It wasn't until he met Lois, until he went to New Themyscira, and actually, that was one of the sequences that I really appreciated. He goes to that place, and there's that sense of the alien seeing this world for the first time, seeing this devastation, this travesty, and then having Lois tell him how wrong it is, was something that I just so... He saw the monsters that Sam was telling him about for the first time. And that was what led him to his no more moment. This has got to stop. That was something that when Sinclair showed up, he recognized him for the monster that he was because of what he'd seen leading up to it. And the pacing of this issue 3, I thought, was so pivotal to my wanting to see him throw down with Sinclair and win. It was great because I started following this journey with this kid. I'm a fan of that. I'm a fan of a comic where you're riding along with the main character. We rode with Sinclair in issue 1, started riding with Cal and him to a certain extent in issue 2, but issue 3 was all about us riding with Cal. And it was a nice, kind of, again, transition where issue 1 was one guy, issue 2 was kind of bumping us off to Cal, and by issue 3 I'm like, Sinclair, he's dog meat.
Mm-hmm.
I liked the pacing of that, and I love that I wanted to go to New Themyscira when you showed the first establishing shot of it.
Gene does such a great job with the geography there. He makes that raising of England look real to me, where before I was like, what? He makes it work.
And I tell you, just the facial expressions, I absolutely loved them throughout this. Just the wonder, the horror, and then even when he first comes on that fruit, when he first sees the lightning, when he first sees the New Themyscira, then when he sees the dead bodies on the freeway and the destruction, just that horror look. But even when he's fighting Sinclair, he goes from moments of fear and oh my god to hoorah, rage, gonna kick some butt, kind of it's time to throw down. The variations of the emotions going through, just in Cal's face was just absolutely wonderful. And it was something that blending of the coloring with, gives a great tone. You see the look on his face. You see some cool action sequences, but we never lost more character growth. We never lost Cal. And I thought that was something that really just sank home for me for this third issue.
One of the lines that I really liked, and I want to compliment this, was when Sinclair's out of the Phantom Zone, you locked away a warrior and a spoiled child who wouldn't fight. You asked me to protect America, but I see beyond nations now. The you locked away a warrior and a spoiled child bit was really pivotal to me because it showed Sinclair's abandonment issues. Like he had this need for, and you see it so well in the early parts of the story as Lane is backing away. Sinclair, like, reflecting, maybe not even directly ever facing it. Like, he really needs somebody to sit down and put him on a couch and talk to him. But, but I love that in this moment you see it coming to a head that all he ever really wanted was a hug from Sam Lane. and I'm not talking about like a physical hug, but I mean just that kind of nod, like good work, soldier, and all that, all the way through, this kind of sense of you went through all this. You did this to yourself. You agreed to be this Subject Zero experiment. And all he ever wanted was, good job, Sinclair. And this has gotten to the point where he's given up the role of Sinclair. He has embraced that he's Subject Zero. He's an alien. Whereas Cal seems to be embracing more being Cal, being, Superman. We're seeing him evolve into being like Clark, being a human. That role, because of the nurturing aspect of Sam Lane. But I loved how this all played off, that at this point he is so disgusted that Sam chose this kid over him. And that this kid had all the things that he really wanted. It really was the jealousy in that moment. And I loved that when that sequence happened, I so totally felt the emotion coming off of Sinclair. Not that I'm not justifying what Sinclair did. Don't get me wrong there. But I loved that I understood what led him to that. I love like murder mysteries and stuff where you can follow the logic of the killer, the murderer. Not saying you condone, but you can follow like what steps led him to that path. And Sinclair is one of those stories.
Well, and the first thing that he says when he comes out is, "I can finally touch you." And not in a good way. And I also really like that Lane doesn't get a final line or a speech or anything. He just gets killed. And kind of a nice touch, I think, because it's unexpected.
Okay, I'm going to do a total side here, just riffing on something that Art just said. But I've been trying to get an event together for some Chicago comics creators, artists, and some writers. And I'd like to get Brian Azzarello to come along, which means I'll probably have to involve professional wrestling in the evening. It gave me this great theme for the name of the event, which will be An Evening of Inappropriate Touching.
I love how this turned into Sam, show us where Sinclair touched you on the doll.
That was on the action figure where he touched you, Mr. Dave.
I don't think Lane will be showing anybody anything.
No, well, you need like a headless doll.
Well, he'll pop the head off the Mego figure, and he'll stick his stinky inside the neck hole and say, "He touched me there."
I think technically it's dangerous to do that to a Mego figure because there's going to be some fan who's going to come after you.
You did what?
I loved his. I agree with the sequence that I loved the sequence where we got to see his first words and just how much Lois means to him at that moment. I also I liked that this is a Cal who, the idea of like tearing people apart because of his upbringing, like stomping on people and all that, who are enemies, who are monsters, is okay to him. Because that was part of his upbringing. It's about stopping the monsters. So he doesn't have this sense of, he wasn't raised by the Kents. And that was a distinction that I really appreciated. It wasn't something that I thought was out of character. It was something that I thought was extremely in character to the upbringing of this character. I felt that he had a moral code and a sense of duty to destroy the monsters. He has a Godzilla complex, for lack of a better word. It's like, yay, Godzilla, go get him, and all that time. But I mean, there's a nobility to him, an innocence to him. If you taught him eventually why that was wrong, there would be remorse to him, which is why I would love to see more stories with him to see if he ever reaches the point where he understands that. But I liked that I never felt like I was never in shock going, oh, Superman wouldn't do this. At this point, I know this kid so well that I totally just went with it and never questioned it once. I think that was a great development of the character, was that aspect of it. Did you ever worry that like having him be more physical during these sequences would be something that would make fans question it? Because it was something I didn't do as a fan, and I normally am one, if somebody's out of character, I'll go, whoa, wait a minute. I thought the establishment of him was brilliant on this.
No, I think we knew we had to because we don't have him as very physical in the first two issues. We kind of really have to bring that out and we have to play big there in that third issue. And also because he goes into Flashpoint 5, and I mean, he crushes the Enchantress under his boot heel.
I love that.
In issue 5 of Flashpoint. We have an obligation to kind of bring that physicality up so that makes sense when we get to there. And that's something that Gene pointed out to me very strongly early on.
Yeah, I mean, it's very much like working on a TV series like The Sopranos or something, where whoever writes an individual episode has to follow the beats of the larger season, and we have to make sure that all the beats make sense and that we transition into the next episode perfectly, even though someone else is writing it. So,
what an insane juggling act this thing must have been, this whole crossover.
See, I appreciate that, though. I think somewhere along the lines, and I think it's a small population of the fans that do this, I love events.
Yeah.
I appreciate the amount of work that goes in on your end. Like everything you guys have been expressing on this, just the hard work and efforts that all of you involved with this, the whole creative team, to get this book out and have it connect so well, was something I appreciated, because as a fan, I found this whole Flashpoint event to be incredibly satisfying. That was true of all the minis. I just thought that this was just one really well-established large world. I was a big fan of X-Men Age of Apocalypse, going back to Marvel Superhero Secret Wars, all the way through, not just DC, Malibu. I loved Malibu's Ultraverse. I loved the interconnectivity of all that. Valiant's work. I like universes, and I love when there's a reason for big events to happen in them. If they're story driven and the creators involved get energetic about like making it connect, like Gene was talking about with that season mentality of television shows, and how if things connect just right, it's something special and you want to watch it again and again. I think that's why events sell well. It's not just because it's an event like people feel it's neat, I've got to pick up every little thing. I think if they were garbage, people aren't going to pick them up. I think it's when they're done well like this, people want them. And somewhere along the lines, I think because people, yes, there's a financial commitment to them, but there's a financial commitment to television series. Buy these things in seasons too, to watch them over and over again. And I do it because they're good. And that's what this is to me. It's that type of thing. And I'm really glad that we've had the opportunity to discuss this with you guys and for you to share just the sheer amount of effort that went into making this its own piece, while at the same time having these very strong connecting threads that would feel satisfying for people connecting it to the main mini, because this is why I like events. I love that kind of cool, like, I want to know what happened to character A. How did he get here? What happened to character B over here? What's the history with Wonder Woman and Aquaman? That was all stuff that, like, for me, if that wasn't explored, that would have been such a missed opportunity. Yeah. And I love that about this event, was this kind of thing. It has me salivate, because I get geeky I'm a big fan of not just regular role-playing games, but I also love video game role-playing games with big, epic stories, side quests, Dragon Age, Mass Effect, stuff like that that's been coming out recently, where the narrative is such a strong part. And again, great visuals. You're getting that whole comic books, I think, are what drive me to it, because nowadays I really think those are templates for what comic book video games should be. It's Flashpoint, I think, would make a great video game if done as a role-playing narrative. And I would love to see more comic book video games take a look at what works in comic book crossovers, because these are natural. Like, this Project Superman is a side quest. And no, it would be like downloadable content, like a massive downloadable content for a Flashpoint video game, where you could go and say, okay, Superman is this side character that, you're following Barry, you're playing as Barry, but this is your chance to follow Superman's story over here. This is some great opportunities here. And this is what I was geeking out through this entire event. I'm like, I feel like I'm reading a video game.
Well, it would certainly, I can imagine them doing this kind of thing, since certainly City Heroes has done like stuff, but I mean, for DCU Online, it could have been an amazing set of synergies if they could have had some new content available that was sort of Flashpoint themed for the players on that, for that MMORPG.
I hope that we see more of that kind of thing as publishers and companies realize that, especially now that they're trying to push digital comics, that there is a big crossover between people who are reading their comic books and people who are playing their video game, and that it's a way to attract people from one into the other and vice versa.
Lois's death sequence was something that I really loved because this is this opportunity for Cal and her to stand together against the doomsday kind of thing. To see him come in and really it's one philosophy versus another. It's Sam Lane's, failed experiment, and I don't know how you fit Lois Lane into that, but he's part of like one. She and Cal are part of one of Sam's worlds, and Sinclair's part of another world. It was really kind of neat to see this battling of the two ideologies to see if Sam's could really fix his failed experiment, and he does here. This is this one opportunity for Sam to really have this chance through his kids. He didn't live to see this.
Right.
This is his legacy, though, in this moment. And I loved that was a connection for me in all this, was Sam's legacy. Because I didn't expect myself to feel that way at the end. But I loved how that was seemingly a supporting character in this who had such a pivotal role in how this ending played out philosophically.
Well, I want to say again, I love Lois, and I think I was very glad to talk with Andy Lanning and to bring Lois forward, and then Gene was consistently an advocate for making Lois's portrayal there in the end stronger and stronger, and that was one of those things where Gene kept going, well, can we do this and do that, and I was like, oh, okay, and it ended up being much better for it, and of course the ending is different than the first version of the ending that we had.
One of Lois's best lines were when Sinclair is distracted by the Amazons. She comes running at Cal, and I loved the intensity that she had in that sequence where she's running towards him. You see the dust under her boot as she's going, and Cal's like clearly beaten up on the ground. And she goes, Cal, you have to get out of here now. But I like that, Cal, you have to get out of here now. It's clear she was staying. I mean, that was something, the strength of Lois in that moment, it wasn't about, you got to get us out of here now. And that was a distinction that hit me immediately when I read that line. I'm like, wait a minute, she's going to stay. In that moment, she feels this is her responsibility. She's going to do this. I've always loved the strength of Lois, and I think it's an important portrayal of the character. And I loved in that moment that, she was concerned about this kid, knowing everything that he'd been through. It goes back to previous encounters she had with him and when she was talking to her dad about it, and, Sinclair, and just, her whole feelings about, what was so wrong about what was done to Cal. I loved that, and I think Cal gets inspired by her in that moment, which is something I think we've seen in great Superman storytelling with Clark and Lois. Because you want to get why would he fall in love with this woman. And in this sequence of events, I'm like, again, just a great portrayal of, in a very different way, why there's a strength of character to Lois that this godlike creature would immediately fall in love with. Like, what is it about her? And in that moment, he's in awe of her. There's that, I'm in awe of her. I loved that. And that was through dialogue and through the visual of her running down there. Because she was really, in that moment, putting herself at risk to go and talk to him. And I thought that was just a very well played out sequence.
Well, I've always thought that it's, I guess, pretty obvious, but what Clark sees in Lois is this sort of beautiful thing in human beings, these people that have no powers but continue to throw themselves into crazy situations, and just how beautiful that is. And when he looks at Lois, that's what he sees, I think.
I also want to make a nod out to the Lois Lane and the Resistance creative team, because we knew that we were the last issue of that series in a way, and we had to take on the themes of Lois being this, this woman taking on the whole Amazon army by herself at first. We had to continue that theme and say, this woman is not going to back down, no matter what the threat.
Well, and that she had been a reporter, and she had been covering a story, and that by the time she gets to the end of that third book of Lois Lane and the Resistance, she's kind of moved from being just a reporter watching the situation to being integrally involved and seriously committed to justice in this.
I think this is where their relationship kind of eternally remains interesting when handled right. When they're well written, you get why, whether they're married, not married, whatever. I'm not a big believer that they can't be married. I'm a big believer that whatever their relationship status is, you've got to showcase Lois as being just as strong a character as Superman. You know, not that she has to have power. I don't mean it that way. I mean that her power is her conviction. Even when she butts heads with Superman over that conviction, or comes at it from a different viewpoint, or knows something her own way differently from him and like is really digging her heels in, there's got to be that strength of character, that strength of conviction where you respect her. Whether you agree with everything she says or agree with Clark's side of it or not, doesn't matter. It's at the end, both characters, you've got to believe in their conviction to their respective causes, and that they are willing to do anything they can, no matter what, to accomplish those things, no matter how vulnerable they are. We've seen Clark at very vulnerable moments throughout his career. You see it here, where he knows this guy could kill him. In many ways, I think he feels this guy will kill him. I think, it's sometimes there's certain elements in this where there's a happy accident that he ends up surviving. He ends up seeing an opportunity at that one moment, that pivotal moment where he can overtake his foe. And that wasn't something that he walked in with a plan knowing he was going to be able to do. It was luck of timing, of using his powers to see something, and that was that one pivotal chance for him to survive all this. So I loved that. I mean, that was something between both characters that I just found that was connected by their vulnerability, and in many ways, their invulnerable conviction. It was kind of cool.
You mentioned that there was you guys were looking at a different ending for Lois. What were you guys originally thinking about, or other options you guys were throwing out there?
So the original draft of the script we did is much more of a kind of a classic Tarzan Jane moment where Lois doesn't die and they kind of kiss, but she kind of sends him off because she realizes that she can't kind of hold him there, that she has to let him go. He has to go off into this war that we know is about to happen, because we know all the superheroes and things are gathering. He's probably going to die, and he knows he's going to die, and she knows she's not going to see him again. And that was sort of our original version, and that followed on the thing that they kind of told us at the beginning is they wanted that sort of Tarzan and Jane theme. We did that version of the script, and we got a note that said we're really hoping that Lois would die at the end of the book.
Well, they thought it would be a better motivation for Cal if she died, and then this is why he's so angry instead of Flashpoint number 5.
Right. So I did the rewrite with that version, and they took a look at both, and they decided to go with the version with Lois dying, which I think is tough because I don't like casually killing off characters' romantic interests or supporting interests just as a motivational thing. I think you have to make that have some serious weight because obviously there's a whole women in refrigerators issue. And so I wanted to make that have weight, which is why I do have her commenting on the cliche itself and a little bit there, because she recognizes that she's put herself in that situation and that this does echo it. I just didn't want to have it sort of flatly do that, she dies and Superman gets angry thing. I wanted it to have more weight than that.
And I got to say, just in a broader sense of my feeling for the whole Flashpoint crossover series, I feel like for the readers, if they'd thought about it, if Lois had survived, and then we never really described what happened to her, all the readers would kind of understand. Lois is just standing there alone in the middle of London while the battle happens, 150 miles away or something like that.
Well, no, it's Trafalgar. It's maybe a mile and a half away.
Oh, a mile and a half. Okay, yeah, but she's not close enough to actually see the battle. She can hear it. She knows something's going on. And then she finds out that the whole world, the whole Earth is just being destroyed. And just knowing that Lois was standing there in that place watching the Earth be destroyed was actually a little more emotionally resonant for me than having her die before it happened. So I kind of wish that subconsciously the readers had been able to experience that.
I liked how you guys explored attachment in this and lack of attachment, where Sinclair was really fighting to give up all the attachment because of the pain, not realizing that a lot of what drove him was due to his attachments. That was part of what made him powerful, this need to please General Lane. And if he found maybe a different way, that's where I do think he needs somebody to talk to, his path would have been totally different. But I love when Clark, Cal, it's funny how, I was calling him Cal in my initial read-throughs very early on, but then when we get to the end of the story, I do feel like he's Clark. I don't know, that transition's very interesting how it happens here, because in this moment, you're always saying attachment leads to suffering, so be unattached. I think it was in that moment that he realized that Lois, the attachment to Lois there, and maybe, and to Sam, obviously, reflection of that, but I do think this moment where he and Lois are both battling this, he realizes the importance of attachment, and how wrong Sinclair's got it. And I just loved seeing, him look powerful after he does that punch, where he's sitting, on his tush, holding that fist up in that sequence with that strength there. You got this scrawny kid who, to me, in that moment, looks every bit as majestic and strong as Superman does in the red, yellow, and blue. And there was something in that moment, to me, that I thought was just really... It just goes to show it's not how you dress the man, it's the actions of the man that I think gives you that kind of feeling. But he felt like in that moment when she's when she's sitting there, we don't know yet what's happened to her, but in that moment, there was some kind of majestic strength to him.
Oh yeah, Gene did a great job with that.
Yeah, and Lowell's amazing job just playing with this very, very... Lowell understands Buddhist philosophy pretty well, and he did a very good job of making a twisted version of it from somebody who, frankly, just doesn't understand it that very well, but is trying to use it to become essentially a modern-day samurai.
Well, and I've heard people who kind of ape those kind of Eastern philosophies but end up being very self-absorbed with them, and they kind of use them as an excuse for bad behavior. And I thought about that as a kind of a philosophy for a villain who would have a real sense of self-justification and would claim to have a morality. When I went to start thinking about this, of course, I went back. I think for anybody who's doing Superman now, you have to go and read Grant Morrison's All-Star Superman. Mm-hmm. And in some ways, at least in the back of my mind, Subject Zero is kind of a reverse version of what happens to Luthor in that Luthor sees everything, sees all the connections, and as a result of that, becomes a better person and kind of loses through enlightenment. Whereas Sinclair's a character who kind of sees everything, sees all the connections, but manages to still develop a very self-absorbed philosophy based on that, even though he can see all this stuff, even though he can see all the connections. His enlightenment is the other way around. It's really negative.
Guys, when you were talking about, Gene, you just mentioned modern-day samurai. Was that part of the thinking with the Subject 1 logo?
That was it was a very specific. I'm trying to go through all the design choices on that one. I was trying to make something that looked vaguely like modern movie superhero costumes, and also a lot of Japanese video game designs, which is part of the reason why I included the themes from Dragon Ball Z. But also, the actual white logo on Subject Zero's chest was originally meant as something that all the Bizarro clones would have, and also Kal-El would have. And it's a combination of Alex Ross's Kingdom Come Superman logo, along with John Byrne's Kryptonian iconography down the front of the robes on his Kryptonian.
I didn't
sweet.
I didn't notice that. I'm glad you pointed that out, Gene.
Did not know that.
Yeah, very literally. I very directly just put the two together, and that's what it would look like if you put them together. So it's just sticking that Superman logo onto the strip of weird symbols that John Byrne used to use.
I was trying so hard when we started this discussion to stick to just a straight Q&A because I was trying to be respectful of your guys' time. And I'm so glad that I went back to the way that Jim and I normally do discussions. As I know Art shared with you guys, be prepared that we might do a 3-hour shtick thing. I was trying to keep it more compressed, out of respect to the three of you being here, and I really appreciate your time that you've given us here because we wouldn't have gotten to things like this had I not just jumped back the way that we normally like to chat about comics. I want to talk about this. I know we talked about Lois's death, but again, this one dialogue choice, because I know that you had two different choices on the way you could go, and you were told to go the route of Lois's death. I liked that you didn't just leave it, like you made mention that, Cal, you have to go help, have to save these people, not because of me. I like when she was thinking about the cliche, she was trying to, in her own way, do what her dad was doing with him, make him a better man. to say, don't make this all about vengeance. Make it about doing the right thing. Do it because it's the right thing to do. That was just, it was such a great moment because it's her dying words and something that are going to resonate with this kid for the rest of his life. There's going to be anger. That's what's driving his actions in Flashpoint 5. But I love that I felt like she gave him in that moment a gift where it will create a path for him. It's why I would love to see more stories with this guy, because I'd like to see where he goes from here. Like, what impact did that have on what his future life is like? And I think any good story, whether you get future stories from it or not, you should think about and care about the character beyond it. Like, I think that there's some part of you that should resonate with you. You should take it with you. And I do that with my favorite TV shows when series come to an end. Art, you referenced Smallville earlier. The Smallville versions of those characters. There's parts of me that would love to know where they go. Whether I get that or not in the future, that's irrelevant. It's that I cared. And I think that was true with this Cal. I care. I want to know what happens to this kid. And I'm going to make up my own stories in my mind of what's going to happen with this kid. I do that with role-playing games. That's part of imagination. Those characters should live on afterwards. And I love that she, in her own way, inspired him to be a Superman. She coined it, in the classic DC storytelling. In many ways, she coined the philosophy in this storytelling. And it was kind of, I love that it was Dad at first maybe setting up the foundation, but she was a pivotal role as well, just like in the classic mythos. And that worked well. It just was something that was great. And I agree, whether she died or not, I think that would have still been her role. So I love that there was two different options. There was an exploration of like, hey, we could have let her live, and there was an opportunity to think about what role would she play in his life after this as well, which I think is a cool exploration as well. So I do think it works on either level.
We were talking about the Subject 1 logo before. You guys saw the pins that DC had, right?
Yes.
I got a batch of those in the mail from DC, and I got it right as I started working on the third issue. And so it was really cool to have a Project Superman pin laying on my desk while I worked on Project Superman. It was really cool.
I love that comics, and I think there is a connection between video games and comics. I like the new emphasis on swag. I think that, you talk about there being a new digital initiative and looking at, like, maybe your video game crowd and lapsed readers and all the different avenues you can look at with potential of how do we get readers into comics maybe that haven't gone there before. But I do think that is something that has worked very well in video gaming, has been swag. I think it works in role-playing games, which, by video, there's a huge role-playing audience who are video gamers. And I think, if you look at a lot of your classic role-playing games that are video games, there's a lot of cosplay, there's a lot of action figures, there's a lot of statues, there's a lot of, all these different, swords and things that are in the games. People want that swag. And I think you're appealing to not just the comic crowd when you do stuff like that, with comics. I think you're appealing to a different kind of collecting audience when you promote action figures and different kinds of pins and buttons and swag and things like that go along with your comic series like this. So I think it was a good move, and I think it is something where that there's going to be a connectability, I think, with a different audience because digital's so in its infancy. But when I think you start connecting with a new crowd through it, I think that's going to be something that they're going to find that's welcoming in comics.
I want a Subject 0 action figure that has like blue glowing eyes.
Or a Hero Clicks. We should do like
Hero
the
Clicks.
Flashpoint Hero Clicks and get all these different characters that they introduced.
Lex Luthor with a removable arm. Sam Lane with an adjustable head.
Adjustable. Oh, gosh.
You know what? Wait. I'm laughing. I actually want those.
Or Crypto with arm-ripping action.
Yeah.
Lex Luthor with removable guts.
He's a very low point figure, the Lex Luthor child.
Fully posable. Guys, is there anything else that you want to mention about, I don't know how much more we could possibly mention about working on this project, but I mean, is there something that we left out that you think would be interesting for fans or readers in the series that you want to mention?
Good question.
Well, I just wanted to kind of bring up a few things we brought together. I mean, you were talking about the swag and how we've been talking about how Lowell and Art and I all started off, playing DC role-playing games and sharing DC comic books together. And it's just this huge urge to jump into the creativity of this DC universe. And it's just wonderful being able to do it, or play the video game, grab the swag, dress up as a character. And the very fact that you guys are are podcasting about this is just you guys jumping into the process, and because you should. That's what makes it great.
Yeah, I'd like to see, a lot more things like the handbooks to the universe and event guidebooks and things like that. I mean, one of the things I like about you mentioning all the swag for RPGs, video RPGs now, and actually for a lot of the JRPGs that I play, they've now started to do republications of early versions and soundtrack editions, and then also art books and world books from those games that you can finally now buy. That gives a lot more sort of behind-the-scenes information and things. And I'd like to see that. I know that Margaret Weiss picked up the license to do the Marvel role-playing game.
Yeah.
And what they're going to be doing is they're going to do a basic set, and then they're going to do event books like a Secret Wars book and an Age of Apocalypse book, kind of things like that, which is I think is supposed to be both a source book for readers as well as an RPG book. And I'd like to see that kind of thing for the DC universe more.
Yeah.
And they're packaging the trade dress and the size of those Marvel RPG books are going to match the size and the trade dress of the trade paperbacks of those events.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and so it will really look like a companion piece.
That's great.
Yeah, I think it's really, really smart.
But I'd love to see some more books. I mean, that would talk about those. I mean, one of the things is, of course, now we've got 52, so we don't know what events of the past remain as canon. But, I'd like to see more things like that.
See, I think that's the brilliant of Flashpoint. They all remain canon.
Right.
Because it's all, like, Flashpoint has made all the continuity that happened before Flashpoint happened. Then Flashpoint happened, then there's a new continuity. So the new continuity will have elements and bits and pieces that occurred from the previous continuity, sure, that are part of its universe, but it's created like this splintered timeline. So if you get into the whole continuity thing, it's a brilliant way of any fan that says that, well, now the previous continuity doesn't matter. Well, that's not true. If you read Flashpoint, that's your blinking point right there. Everything did happen. And the way that I could call it epilogue, that little epilogue to the end of Flashpoint, really in one little sequence of events has now connected everything that happened before without having to throw anything out the window, because it's all been explained throughout that continuity, how all of the past continuities fit into that. Mm-hmm. So every story now matters. And yet it's given them complete freedom, and any creative team complete freedom to say, these are, my pivotal stories that I'm going to focus on from the past as I'm working on these characters. These are the essentials. I think it was a great way to do that, because I feel like as a fan who I like history, I like the continuity, I get into the geeky, who is this character, that character. I appreciate the fact that every story I read before mattered. It all mattered. It was part of that. Whether or not they all are a part of these characters' history and that is irrelevant to me now, because they made it work. That was great.
Well, the way I like to put it is that what the launch of the New 52 has done is it's returned things back to the status quo of how things were before the first Crisis on Infinite Earths, where essentially, before that, writers would pick and choose which parts of the past were canon as they went along, and they would kind of disregard or kind of pretend that certain things had never happened. And that's back where we are. We're back to where the writers have that much control again. It's great.
Yeah, I love that. There's a creative freedom there. Lowell, you were touching on source books and things like that, of that nature. When this 75th anniversary hit, I got that big Paul Levitz suitcase book. There was another one that was published that's a slipcase anniversary book from Sequart and from Back Issue Magazine and stuff like that. I love getting different explorations of characters, creators, DVDs, books, things like that, because those are all things that I'm really into learning. I'm not a writer. I'm not an artist. I'm a fan. Everything you guys are sharing with me now is an education for me. Makes me appreciate the industry more and just what goes into the enjoyment I get as the quote unquote viewer of the comic books, to go back to our television references from earlier seasons, I'm the viewer. I'm the one that, is just the target audience. But yet I love all that stuff that gives me more insight into, I think it is why I reread more now. I think the accessibility, the community accessibility to extras through a variety of different medium, I think has just made me appreciate this hobby more. It's one of the reasons why I do a podcast where we try to be the antithesis of forums where people kind of jump on with the hit-and-run negative comments. It's because of the fact that I think I appreciate so much more what goes into the quality creations that we do get from comics that I've gotten since I was like 5.
Yeah.
So I think that's something that I appreciate, that more of these things are being published. I agree with you. I would love to see role-playing source books published from, from a content provider that's linked with DC, going that route. That I like what Marvel's doing with that too. I think anything that can be another avenue into this experience is welcome, to kind of make a different kind of connectability. That's why when like the DC MMO hit, I'm like, that's great. It's going to just a new fan that's going to be exposed to these characters, might try out a book, might try something new. Just exposure and visibility to comics as a medium that people should be checking out, I think is terrific. So this stuff's cool.
And I think that had this push with digital comics that DC is doing, is another example of that. And there are a lot of opportunities there to include with a digital comic book, extra content or links to something, links to DC's website, links to a Who's Who entry, maybe a reprint, a digital reprint of a relevant story. If you just read a new Superman comic book that has Brainiac in it, then include a reprint of some old Brainiac story that's relevant. It's actually, in a strange way, it creates a new opportunity for DC to expose people to all this older stuff they have.
That's a good idea. That's a good point.
By the way, can I put up a vote, and Gene, you have to forgive me for this one, that top 10, because Wildstorm is a part of the DC continuity, that was one of those 3 worlds that was merged, that somewhere top 10 happened? Just because I'm a huge fan. So I'm going to throw it out there because I can't, because, I want to.
Well, you can't prove it's not there.
Right.
Well, that's exactly right. And I loved the recent revival of it, so I would like to see more. And I know...
You believe whatever you want, Sean.
We know, okay, in top 10 continuity, we know that there are thousands of different dimensions that can be reached through the Trans-World Station. So there's no reason why they couldn't just, the top 10 characters couldn't pop into any of the DC multiverses and start arresting people.
Absolutely. and what great characters they would beat. Wait, we're talking about diversity. If you take a look at the 52 line and all the unique titles they put in there, there's nothing like top 10 that's in that lineup right now. Get that in there.
That would be a pretty awesome book where you do have the top 10 characters coming into the main DC universe, tracking down a fugitive.
Yeah. That's exactly what I was going to say. Just tracking down a fugitive.
Wow.
And arresting people for all kinds of weird crimes.
And there's wacky animals.
Yeah.
Guys, is there anything, before we wrap up, I want to make sure to shout out, is there any upcoming work you want to shout out? Anything previously that you want to get the word out about? Something that's being collected or something that you want to let fans know? Or maybe how to follow where things are going with your careers? Is there anything, websites, anything that you want to shout out?
Art, you have a book that you worked on with me that's coming out in a few weeks.
Yeah, Gene and I have a few things lined up. I'm not sure. I'll let Gene say what we're working on because I'm not sure what's official or what's hush-hush. Or...
the big one that we worked on a year ago that's coming out in maybe 2 weeks, which is the Simpsons Treehouse of Horror story we did.
Oh, right, that's right, the Simpsons Treehouse of Horror story, which I think I'm allowed to say this even though I worked on it. It's beautiful. Yeah, that's coming out the end of this month, I think?
I think so, yeah.
Well, I guess next month, yeah. Bongo Comics.
Written by Sandra Cannon and full grayscale work by me, coloring by Art. And, yeah, it was only 6 pages or something like that, so we just went hog wild with it.
It's pretty unusual looking, I have to say. It's not what you would expect, I think.
And Xander Cannon was the your top 10 collaborator, too.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. Gene and I are also working together on a couple things at DC. I'll let Gene mention those because I'm not sure which ones I can mention.
Man, actually, there's not that much I can actually announce until it's really, really officially announced. So.
Okay.
I did a non-comics project for DC, which it's very cool, but it is not going to ever show up in a comic shop. You'll have to travel somewhere cool to see it. But they told me not to say what it is. It's driving me crazy.
It's driving me crazy now, too. Thanks.
I like that, though. I like that there's things coming out that you guys are really anticipating and excited about that we're going to get to enjoy down the road. I don't mind announcements like that. That gets me kind of excited to, okay, I'm going to keep an eye out. So that's honestly, the way you put it is the best way to put it. Like, keep an eye out. We got stuff coming.
Yeah, we've got some pitches that we've been playing around with and that we're working on. And so right now I'm trying to hustle, trying to find some work, and we got some stuff we've been playing, like 3 or 4 different ideas that we've been batting around for a while. That we're not.
Yeah, we're just kind of waiting to some degree to see how things play out in the new 52, because of course it will be a few months before it becomes obvious what's going on and what there's room for.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, if you're a publisher out there, of course, I'll just mention, of course, Lowell is obviously a very, very good writer, and he knows every geek sphere you can imagine better than you do.
God, I don't know about that. But yeah, the stuff we've been working on is sort of non-superhero play-around stuff while we see where 52 ends up. I think there's some great room in the 52 universe, and there's just some brilliant things coming out. I mean, how can you say no to a new Swamp Thing series? There's great things.
Or Frankenstein.
Yeah.
What's it called? Frankenstein and the
Agent of Shade.
Right.
Yeah.
I have to read that just because of the name.
Right.
Well, see,
and Mr. Terrific in his own book.
Yeah.
Yes, that's wonderful.
So you're touching on what I like about the new 52 is I think anytime you do something like this where you open up opportunities for creators to kind of go hog wild and use all the toys of the past that you kind of closed off, it's a good opportunity. So that was something, while they created a very cool Ground Zero in September, I do think one of the great opportunities to spin out of this is the chance for creators to, when you talk about pitches and opportunities to do that, it gives you an opportunity to say, okay, we're going to wait and see how the lay of the land plays out with this, but then there's some room for us to come up with some really cool creative ideas, which then it gets me as a fan excited because I've always liked that about the DCU. It's wacky. And it should be one of those places where you've got a universe where there's flying horses and dogs that fly, and, you know, there's been talking pets, and and all that stuff's worked in a world where you've got a gritty Batman, and you can do all these, you know, grounded to the real world stories as well. You know, you can do a Jonah Hex where it's a straight on and on Western that just is so brilliant. Like, you can take it anywhere. You know, space, dimensions, whatever. It all can work in the DC universe when done right. So I'm hoping that those opportunities open up for creators to do some really cool and unique pitches that blow my mind. Because comics are endlessly a medium, I think, where people, you know, kind of, they set the bar. That's why is film and television going to comics? It's because of that.
That's what's great about comics is they are relatively easy and inexpensive to make, and you can throw just any crazy idea in there because you can draw, you know, what would on a TV show or a movie be a really expensive special effect or a really hard to achieve character, and just you can do anything in comics.
Well, and I love that they have really very deliberately set themselves the bar of having a lot of very different genres covered, and in a way where they go, okay, we don't know if this is going to fly necessarily. We don't know how a war book is going to look or how this is going to look, but let's give it a try and let's see what happens. I mean, that the fact that they're doing the all-star Western and things. The only thing wasn't there like a noir or sort of more mystery-oriented book? I can't remember.
Yeah, I thought that they were doing something with the all the pulp characters that they have. Still.
No, but that was before this, and I think that got canceled.
Yeah.
The Question, or even more Gotham Centrally, or that kind of noir or mystery or hardboiled, because it got so many great classic detective characters in the universe.
I actually wish First Wave. I'm sorry, Gene. Go ahead.
First Wave. Yeah.
They're going to do a relaunch of some of the Fawcett line, but focusing on some of the different characters. So they're going to do this really kind of dark, gritty, and very, very sexy book about Taki Tani called Furry.
You believe a cat can yiff?
Brown bag to protect your anonymity. Wow. The sad part is I'd buy that.
I bet that has a big market, kind of, unfortunately.
Yeah, let's not go there. I'm also working on these are like long-term projects, but I was working on Sam Hill with Greg Scott over at Archie Comics, and that's almost done. I'm not sure what their plan is in terms of a schedule on that, but I'm also working on some longer-term graphic novels with Greg Scott, and one of them is going to be from Archaea, and the other one I can't remember right now, but those are a year or more off. He has started drawing one of them, but I haven't started coloring any of that stuff yet.
Cool. Yeah, let's definitely, when those projects, as they start to come to fruition, even though they're not DC, let's make sure to do something with them to chat them out to listeners.
We'll do. Oh, and I'm kind of rejiggering my website this week, so I realized that there's a way that I can make it easier for me to update it. So
cool.
Yeah, I have a blog, but it's mostly about RPG stuff, so I won't mention it.
You sure?
ageofravens.blogspot.com, all one word. So
it's a good blog. I follow it.
And then, Art, what's your website again for our listeners? I know it, but what's your website again for our listeners?
ArtLionArt.com.
Okay, so people can look for the new, soon-to-be updated version of your website.
Yes.
That's cool. Gene, anything you want to shout out?
I'll just mention that I recently updated at least the front page of my website, which is just simply geneha.com.
All right.
See, his is classic and simple.
Mine's all fancy, and Lowell doesn't have one.
Well, Art, didn't you actually buy that domain for you or something? The Artline something?
I own it now, yes. I own Artlion now. There was a complication I had a couple of years ago. I had to go with Artlion Art because some squatter owned Artlion.com.
Yeah, but you could switch everything over whenever you wanted to, right? So.
I could, but now, I kind of like Artlion Art.
Well, you do mirror sites, so it's the same material.
Right. Yeah, you're right. So I can't think of anything else. Seems like there's something else. But, I'm really looking forward to seeing what happens with a new 52 and if we can get a pitch in that works and fits into a niche or a gap in this new universe.
I have to say, working with Gene and Art and doing this Project Superman, regardless of any frustrations that we had or changes around and the craziness, what was just absolutely the most amazing work I've ever done. For me, it was the most pleasurable thing I've ever done, and I got a chance to work with Scott Snyder right at the very beginning, and he helped me out in getting issue 1 plotted out and a little bit on issue 2, and he was just the few hours I had on the phone with him were essentially a master class in comic writing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So he's brilliant.
Yeah, I'll just do that in theory that, I'm trying to entertain everybody who's going to read the book. But when it comes right down to it, my immediate goal, the thing that keeps me going, is just trying to entertain everyone else on the editorial and creative team. And it's just fun trying to do stuff just to make these guys laugh or groan or do whatever. So
that ultimately will pay off for us.
Yeah.
And this is one of the things I like about working with Gene, just from a coloring standpoint, is because his artwork is so good and so creative, I'm constantly challenged to sort of raise my game and come up with something new. It's just good for me as a colorist, and it makes it more enjoyable and more rewarding, and it's really been great. It's kind of hard to wrap my head around it because, to some degree, every day I sit down, I color, and it's work. And I have to stop and step back and remind myself that I'm working with Gene and Lowell, who I've known since 1985 or something. Mm-hmm. It's really cool.
Yeah.
Well, I want to thank all of you because not just for your time here today, but for your work ethic, the way you look at comics, and just the entertainment medium in general. Because, as a fan, I've been a fan of comics, like I said, for 35 years now. And it's really what keeps me reading, keeps me excited, is the fact that there's so many creators like you guys that are setting the bar so high and just keeping it interesting and exciting and making, when I think I've seen it all, you you change the rules, you play the game differently, you tell stories in a different way, you bring in your experiences into the books. And this Project Superman was one of those stories that I'm like, wow, I was really glad at the opportunity. Art, we thought we were just going to be talking to you, and we love having you on the show. I feel like we always end this podcast when we have you on apologizing for this. Now we've got to apologize to, not just apologizing to you, we always apologize to your family as well. But now we have to apologize to all three of you and everyone in your lives for the amount of time that you had to give us tonight. But I really can't thank you enough, because we've shared with Art on the show many times my respect level for what goes into the coloring aspect of comics, and how you managed to get that done in a month is mind-blowing to me. And just to share with all of you, thank you so much for all you sacrifice, nights you stay up late, to get these books out with that little extra something that you could have left out probably, but it's those bonuses that we talked about on this show, those little tidbits that, like, hey, look in the background, there's this, look in the foreground, there's this, there's these little things that you only get when you look over the books again and again to see those things. It's greatly appreciated. I thank you again for your time today and joining us on this episode.
Thank you, Sean. Thank you, Jim. We really appreciate that.
Oh, I was just going to say what I always say. I sit here and work, and I listen to all kinds of stuff, including your guys' show, and I'm always glad to be able to be on the show and to participate and contribute to a show that I've enjoyed over how many years has it been now?
Well, it's over 5. We're actually working towards our 6th. Yeah,
You're old.
Yeah, it's like dog ears, right?
Oh, before we go, I just wanted to say, of course, this has been a ball talking to everybody. But for old time's sake, I want to say this directly to Lowell. Lowell?
Yes?
I take out my +5 Vorpal Sword and I hit Art's character.
All right. He kills
I
you.
rolled a 5, I missed!
Where's my... No, I get to roll something?
No, you did.
Oh, dang it.
I've killed a number of Art's characters, so...
Okay, I'll just write up a new character.
Okay.
And this guy will be more obnoxious than...
Thank you guys very much.
Thank you.
See ya. Bye.
Bye.
Nothing like the handy-dandy electro claw for carving through metal doors.
I want to once again thank Gene Ha, Lowell Francis, and Art Lyon for joining us on the show. It was really a terrific episode. I hope you guys got the same enjoyment that we got recording it. Just terrific people, and it was great that they shared their friendship with us, because I thought there was something really cool to connect with as the episode was going on, with how well they were interacting with each other. It's kind of neat to see that camaraderie in comics. So I want to thank them once again. I want to thank our sponsors of the show, DCBService.com and InStockTrades.com. Remember, over DCBService.com, this is the time to grab the number 3 issues, I should say, from 52, that they are doing that discount again of 50% off. So all of you that have been collecting those issues, all of those new issues are available for 50% off again one more month. They are trying to bundle them together to give people a chance to try out the new books and then make a decision as far as, are they going to follow the whole line, or are you going to pick and choose between the books? Also want to remind everyone, right from their website, and actually right from InStockTrades.com as well, you can click on links to be connected to the Comixology digital program. And your account for Comixology, you can use that one to connect to any of your devices, iPod, Android. You can also read the books direct on your computer, laptop. So any of you that have been collecting your comics digitally, please consider using our show sponsor as your portal to buying those books, because that supports them then. And it doesn't cost you any more to do it. It's the same price as you would pay on any of the apps or anything. So please consider supporting DCB Service and InStockTrades.com that way. Over at InStockTrades.com, want to remind everyone that they should be checking out Top 10, the 49ers, and the entire Top 10 line right from InStockTrades.com. Orders of $50 or more give you free shipping, and I want to thank both of those websites for continuing to support our podcast. I just want to real quickly shout out our show voicemail line. It's 1-440-388-4434 or Dr. Norge on Skype. And all show voicemails will be returning on our next episode. We took a break the last 2 episodes for show voicemails. We have been getting them all. Promise I will air every single one of them. And please feel free to keep calling with your thoughts on the new 52, your thoughts on Project Superman, anything else you want to shout about on Raging Bullets. Please make sure to call in on those. The next 2 shows we will get caught up on everybody's. And we really appreciate you guys calling in, because it's really terrific to have you part of the show. Our next couple episodes, we're jumping right back to League of Extraordinary Gentlemen to wrap up that, and we're going to be jumping back to the New 52. We are going to begin a series of episodes now where we're going through every book on the New 52. We're going to be gradually going along. Some of the books we're going to hit on issue number 2 just because of timing-wise. Their second issue will be out by the time we hit them, but we will cover every single New 52 book on Raging Bullets. So you get to hear us talk about every one of your favorite characters, the books that you're enjoying. Feel free to keep calling in along the way about them. We'll be glad to talk casually about those books as we're going along in the process as well. But we're going to cover every single book because there's a lot to discuss, a lot of diverse titles, a lot of different titles that are coming out. I've really been enjoying my experience. We're in what's technically, I guess you'd say, week 3 now of the books, and really it's just been a fantastic experience. Jim and I were talking about which books to talk about next, and we're going to kind of do that organically, just kind of jumping into the titles that are interesting us the most on the given weeks, and that's going to be a very hard decision to make between the two of us. So hope you guys will be enjoying these upcoming episodes.
Bye!
Flying through space and time, 1,000 different lifetimes. Fated for love and flaws and incredibly clear sightlines. Swinging your mace around, such a practical outlook. Helping the JSA and occasionally supporting your own book. Hawkman, Hawkman, eagle eyes can't see. Hawkman, your plan and what you do to me. Villains are closing in, be they Thanon Guard or Egyptian. Working so hard to thwart you and Hawkgirl's mission. The odds are not on your side, and danger seems to stack up. Things would be so much easier if you would just call for backup. Hawkman, Hawkman, eagle eyes can't see your plan.